Hello friends, I am Mr. Ghost, and I am here to help you today. I know, you use these videos to fall asleep. So, before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from, and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable, and relax. I still remember the first night I heard it. I was alone on the third floor of our office building, and the entire corridor was dark and quiet. My body tensed the moment I realized there were footsteps outside my door. That sound wasn't normal for that time. It was well past 9 p.m., and nobody else should have been there. I waited, holding my breath, convinced I'd see someone walk by. But there was nothing. The silence after those heavy steps felt even worse than the noise itself. I'm a 36-year-old guy who works in accounting at a marketing firm. We occupy one large space on the top floor, although most people leave by 6 p.m. I usually stay later because I have deadlines. The third floor has a few conference rooms and a break area, but after hours it's practically deserted. Security does a walkthrough once in a while, but they usually stick to the lower floors. There's a maintenance crew, but they come in the morning. I know, because I see them when I first arrive. At night, I'm on my own. That arrangement never bothered me. I like the quiet time. I got more done. I enjoyed the calm. Until those footsteps echoed in the hallway. It was a Tuesday when I first heard them. I had a stack of reports on my desk, and a few documents open on my laptop. The overhead lights were on, but they always felt dim after a long day. I was about to stretch my legs when I heard a distinct clack, clack, clack. It sounded like sturdy shoes hitting the tile floor. I paused. I thought maybe it was the janitor, or a security guard. Part of me even thought it could be someone from another department who forgot something in their office. I went to the door, opened it, and peered out. The corridor was dark because we turn off most lights to save energy. The security lights provided a dull glow, but they didn't illuminate much. I didn't see anybody. I said hello. I felt a little strange talking to an empty hallway, but it seemed necessary. There was no response. I stood there for a few seconds. I listened. Nothing. My ears picked up my own breathing, but no footsteps, no voices. I shrugged it off. I figured maybe it was something like the building's old ventilation system, creating weird echoes. I went back to my desk and kept working. About 10 minutes later, I heard the footsteps again. Only this time they sounded closer. They weren't loud or frantic, they were steady, firm, and unhurried. My pulse quickened. I could feel the hair on my arm stand up. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the door, waiting for a knock or a shadow under the crack. The steps stopped right in front of my office. I expected a knock at that point, but nothing happened. I jumped up, marched to the door, and yanked it open. Again, no one was there. My chest tightened. The corridor stretched out in both directions. The exit sign at the far end glowed red. The other side led to the elevator, which was unlit except for a faint light near the doors. I walked out and flipped on the overhead lights. The fluorescent bulbs took a second to come on, flickering slightly. When they lit the hallway, I scanned the area. I checked the break area to the left and the small meeting room. Both were empty. My breath started coming in shallow spurts and my hands shook a little. But I told myself it was just some random noise. Maybe someone was messing around or leaving in a hurry. Maybe I just missed them by a few seconds. I decided to pack up my stuff and go home. It was almost 10 p.m. I didn't want to stay any later, especially after those unsettling moments. As I walked to the elevator, I kept looking over my shoulder. I don't usually do that, but something felt off. I got in the elevator, pressed the button for the ground floor, and stood there, feeling my heartbeat accelerate. I expected the doors to open and reveal a person standing there. But the elevator ride was uneventful. I passed by the security desk on the first floor, where the guard was half asleep. I didn't say anything to him. I felt a little silly. Footsteps in a hallway? That's not exactly a police matter. The next morning, I arrived around 7:30. The cleaning crew was mopping the lobby, and I recognized one of them. They asked, "Hey, do you guys come up to the third floor at night?" He looked confused and said they only did the third floor in the morning, because that floor was rarely in use after hours. I said, "But do you ever come back at night?" He shook his head. "No, not unless there's an emergency spill." I nodded and didn't push the topic. I felt a knot in my stomach. If the cleaning crew wasn't up there, who was walking around? That day, I got busy and forgot about the footsteps. I had calls, meetings, and a team lunch. I ended up working late again because I lost time during the day. By 8 p.m., most people were gone. 2 coworkers lingered until 8:30 p.m., but eventually I heard them say goodnight and walk off to the elevator. I was back to being alone on the top floor. I tried to keep my mind on my tasks. I typed out a few spreadsheets, updated some logs, and triple-checked my numbers. Around 9:15 p.m. I heard the footsteps again. Same steady pace like someone walking with confidence. No rush. I froze. My first instinct was to ignore it, but curiosity got the best of me. I turned off my table lamp and waited in the dark. I faced the door, straining my ears. The footsteps came down the corridor. They stopped a few offices down. Then they started up again slowly. There was no light outside my door, so I couldn't see anything through the small window in the door. All I had was the sound. I felt my pulse pounding in my neck. My mouth got dry. I tried to swallow, but it felt like my throat was blocked. When the steps reached my door, I stood up. My chair squeaked against the floor, and I realized how loud it sounded. The footsteps paused. I took a few slow breaths and reached for the door handle. My hand was shaking so much that I had to use my left hand to steady it. I opened the door a crack and peeked out. The corridor was dark. I reached around and flipped the light switch on the wall inside my office. The fluorescent light in the corridor lit up. Nothing. Absolutely nobody stood there. I stepped out into the hallway. My shoes made a soft squeak on the tile. I walked in the direction of the footsteps, checking every door. Most were locked. I tried the small lounge area. It was empty. I moved toward the conference room at the far end. Also empty. The only possible exit was the stairwell or the elevator. Both were locked unless you pressed the elevator call button or used a stairwell key. I didn't hear any elevator ding, nor did I see the doors open. It felt impossible for someone to vanish without me seeing or hearing them. I felt uneasy. My stomach churned. My palms were sweaty. I went back to my office, grabbed my things, and left. I didn't stick around to finish my work. I took the elevator down, ignoring the faint background music. I walked past the security desk again. The same guard looked bored. I considered telling him, but I felt stupid. Instead, I just nodded and left. The next morning I mentioned the footsteps to my supervisor. She's a practical person. She told me to check the security cameras. The building has cameras on each floor, plus one near each elevator and stairwell. We both went to the small security room on the first floor. The guard on duty said we could review the footage from the night before. But as soon as he started pulling up the files, I got a strange feeling. My supervisor looked at the screen and then at me. She asked, "Are you sure you want to see this?" I felt a sudden urge to say no. I didn't want to watch. The idea of seeing absolutely nothing on the screen made my skin crawl. The idea of seeing a figure on the screen made it worse. I swallowed hard and said, "Let's not watch it now." She shrugged and let it go. I went about my day telling myself I was overreacting, but that tension stayed with me. My phone vibrated around lunchtime and it was a text from my supervisor saying she wasn't going to bother with the footage unless something more serious happened. We joked about it being a ghost, but I didn't laugh very hard. It didn't feel funny. That night I tried to leave earlier. I wrapped up my tasks by 7 p.m. As I was heading to the elevator, I realized I'd forgotten an important folder in my office. My chest tightened because I didn't want to go back in there, but I had to. I rode the elevator back up to the 3rd floor, walked down the hallway, and entered my office. I flicked on the overhead light and grabbed the folder. Everything looked normal. No weird noises. I breathed a little easier. Then the overhead light flickered. I know fluorescent lights can do that sometimes, but it felt wrong at that moment. I shut my office door and started walking back to the elevator. The hallway felt colder than usual, and I couldn't hear the air conditioner. The footsteps started again. They came from behind me this time. I almost dropped the folder. I spun around, but the corridor was empty. I stood there and my heart banging in my chest. The footsteps seemed to move closer. I heard them like someone was walking straight toward me, but I couldn't see anything. I clenched my teeth and stepped backward toward the elevator. My back hit the elevator doors. I reached for the button, but my hand was shaking so much that I missed it the first time. The footsteps stopped about 5 feet away from me, or so it sounded. There was nothing in front of me except an empty corridor. I slammed the button again and the doors opened. I practically dove inside. I pressed the button for the first floor, and the elevator doors shut. My entire body was trembling. I felt a cold sweat on my forehead. My breathing was uneven, and I clutched the folder against my chest until the elevator dinged and opened in the lobby. I walked quickly past the security desk without looking at the guard. I got into my car and drove home, constantly checking my rearview mirror. I felt silly, but also terrified. My rational side wanted an explanation. The building has old pipes, old vents, old everything. Sounds carry weirdly sometimes. However, it's hard to explain footsteps that feel so real, especially when they stop right in front of me. The next day, I barely said a word to anyone. I buried myself in work, trying to stay busy so I wouldn't think about the night before. When 5:30 p.m. rolled around, I got up, packed my things, and left. I didn't work late. Instead, I figured I'd just get up early the next day if I needed to. For the rest of the week, I left before 6 p.m. My productivity dipped a bit, but I felt safer. I made excuses about traffic and errands. I didn't want to mention the footsteps again because people were starting to give me strange looks. My supervisor didn't press me, but she noticed something was off. The following week, I had a major report due. I couldn't finish it during normal hours. Instead, I tried, but I had to compile a lot of data. On Wednesday night, I stayed until my stomach was in knots the whole evening. Every time the air conditioner kicked on, I jumped. Every squeak from my chair made me twitch. I kept expecting those footsteps. By 8:30 p.m., I still had more to do. I told myself just one more hour, then I'll go home. The building was quiet. I took a short break, walked to the break area for a bottle of water, and scanned the corridor. Nothing. No sound. No movement. I was halfway back to my office when I heard it. Footsteps coming from the direction of the conference room. I turned and looked. The corridor was dim, but I had enough light to see that it was empty. The footsteps were clear, like heavy shoes on tile. They got louder, heading my way. My throat tightened. I watched, expecting to see someone appear, but it stayed empty. My scalp tingled, and I felt my knees go weak. The footsteps stopped about 10 feet away. I clenched my fists, but there was nothing to fight. There was nothing to see. I forced myself to speak. "Hello?" I said. "Who's there?" My voice shook. No response. My heart hammered in my chest. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't just stand there waiting for something to happen. I backed into my office, grabbed my laptop and keys, and hurried back out. The footsteps started again, following me. I could hear them right behind me. My entire body felt tense, like I was about to sprint. I reached the elevator and jabbed the button. It took a few seconds for the doors to open. The footsteps got louder, stopping only when the doors opened and I stumbled inside. I hit the button for the ground floor and the doors slid shut, cutting off the sound. That was last week. Since then, I've changed my schedule. I show up at work earlier and leave before sundown. My supervisor asked why, and I just said I wanted more daylight hours. She didn't push. I think she knows something is going on, but she doesn't want to address it unless it starts affecting my performance. The cleaning crew still claims they don't come upstairs at night. The security guard is still half asleep most of the time. Neither he nor I have checked the footage. I don't know what I'd see if I did, but I can shake the idea that I'd either see nothing at all or see a shape that doesn't belong in any normal sense. I still get a chill whenever I think about it. Sometimes I wonder if I'll hear those footsteps again if I ever need to work late. Right now, I'm avoiding that possibility. I make sure to pack up and leave by 5:30 p.m., no matter how much is on my plate. I can't handle that corridor at night. I can handle the silence broken by steps that have no source. I feel better when I'm gone before those overhead lights flicker and the hallways get dark. I haven't told many people, and the ones I have told just laugh or say it's the building settling. But they haven't heard those steps stop right behind them, and they haven't felt that tightness in their chest when they realize there's nobody there. Maybe I'm losing it. I don't think so, though. Those footsteps were too real. That sound is burned into my mind. If there's something walking those halls at night, I'm not going to stand there and let it find me. I'd rather leave before it starts its rounds. I don't know what's worse, hearing footsteps that shouldn't exist or seeing the proof on camera. For now, I'm happy not knowing. As long as it stays on the 3rd floor and I'm not there, I can pretend it's just a weird dream. But deep down, I know what I heard, and I don't think it's going to stop anytime soon. I felt uneasy the moment I stepped into that apartment. Something about the exposed brick walls and the long, narrow corridor bothered me right away. I heard a faint echo when I walked through the empty living room, like the place had its own voice. It wasn't loud, it was more like a soft reminder that I was entering a space with a past I didn't know. I tried to shrug it off, but the feeling stuck with me from day one. I moved in on a Saturday morning. The movers dropped off my couch, bed frame, mattress, and a few boxes. The place was compact. The living room stretched along the side of the corridor, and at the end there was a small kitchen. It had a tiny window, but the view was blocked by a neighboring building. Hardly any sun reached that area, so it felt dim all day. I put my coffee maker on the counter and placed a small table against the wall. I remember standing there thinking how quiet it felt. That first night, I was exhausted. I unpacked clothes and set up my bed in a corner of the living room. I didn't have a separate bedroom because the space was more like a studio, with a corridor that led to the kitchen and the bathroom off to one side. The main room had exposed red brick on one wall, and the opposite wall was just painted off white. The bricks looked rough and old. I noticed some chipped mortar and scratches, like maybe the previous tenants had tried to hang shelves or pictures and left marks behind. I wondered what kind of people had lived here before me, but I didn't think too much about it at the time. When I finally went to sleep, I woke up around 2 in the morning to a soft noise. It sounded like someone shuffling down the corridor. I shot up and looked around. The room was dark, except for the faint glow from a street lamp outside. My heart pounded. I listened carefully. The sound came again, like light footsteps across the wooden floor. I leaned over and flipped on a small lamp. My pulse was racing, but I had no idea what to do. I live alone, and I had locked the door. I checked every window before going to bed, so I was sure no one got in. But the footsteps sounded real. I sat there, straining my ears. The apartment went silent. No more noise. I got out of bed and walked to the corridor. My socks muffled my steps. The corridor was empty. The lights were off. The kitchen was dark, and nothing seemed out of place. I touched the doorknob to the main door. It was locked. I jiggled it for a second, still locked. No sign of forced entry or tampering. I went back to bed but didn't sleep much. I felt on edge, like the moment I closed my eyes, I would hear it again. The next day, I tried to focus on getting settled. I hung up a few shirts in the small closet, arranged my shoes, and stacked books on a makeshift shelf. I was still tired, but I tried to distract myself. The living room had enough space for a small desk, so I set up my computer there. I kept glancing at the corridor. Something about that long space put me on alert. The apartment was quiet, but I couldn't forget those footsteps. I told myself it was probably the old floors or the pipes. It's an old building, so I assumed everything creaked and groaned at night. That evening I sat at my desk and browsed the internet. The overhead light in the living room buzzed slightly. The corridor light was off, so I could only see a faint outline of the bricks in the dark. After a while I got thirsty and went to the kitchen. My footsteps felt heavy on the floor. The board squeaked under me, making me realize the difference in sound between my steps and the soft ones I heard the night before. Mine were louder, more solid. Theirs were softer, more like someone walking in thick socks or slippers. It was a small detail, but it stuck in my mind. I grabbed a glass of water and leaned against the kitchen counter. There was no natural light, so I kept the overhead light on. I sipped the water, thinking about the day's tasks, when I felt this sudden cool breeze brush against my shoulder. It was like someone passed by me and created a quick gust of air. I spun around, nothing. The kitchen was still, and the corridor light was off. My skin prickled. I felt a sudden chill run down my arms and into my legs. I set the glass down and walked into the corridor. Everything looked normal. No windows were open. I checked the main door again. Locked. I even checked the bathroom window. It was closed. I couldn't figure out where that cool air came from. My nerves were rattled, so I decided to watch some TV on my laptop in the living room. I kept the corridor light on this time. It felt better to have all the lights on. I sat on the couch, ate some takeout, and tried to ignore the lingering dread. Eventually, I fell asleep with the TV still playing. I woke up sometime after midnight to the sound of light footsteps in the corridor again. I froze for a second. The TV's light flickered on my face, but the volume was low. The footsteps sounded like they were moving back and forth. My gut clenched. I forced myself to stand up and move toward the corridor. The light was on, so if anyone was there, I would see them. But as soon as I took a few steps, the footsteps stopped. The corridor was empty. I walked down to the kitchen, checking every inch. I opened the bathroom door, even though it was just a small room with a shower and toilet. Nothing. My arms trembled a bit. I felt shaky, like my body was pumping adrenaline, but I had no target. I told myself it had to be the pipes or the old boards adjusting to temperature changes. I tried to laugh it off, but it sounded forced even to me. Over the next few days, I kept hearing the same footsteps, usually at night. It never happened while I was looking directly into the corridor. It seemed to happen more when my back was turned or when I was in another corner of the room. Sometimes I thought I heard a slight rustle, like clothing brushing against a wall, but I couldn't be sure. Whenever I went to check, everything was still. There was never any sign of a break-in or anything like that. No objects were missing or moved. The only weird thing was the cold drafts that would appear out of nowhere. Once I felt it near my neck while I was sitting at my desk. Another time I felt it on my left arm while looking out the small kitchen window. I started mentioning it to a friend on the phone. I told him I was hearing strange noises in my apartment, and he joked that the place was haunted. I laughed, but I didn't think it was funny. I wasn't seeing any ghosts or figures. I was just hearing footsteps and feeling strange cold spots. Still, it got under my skin. My friend suggested I get a cat to keep me company. I thought about it, but I'm not sure I want a pet right now. Plus, that wouldn't solve the actual problem. One night, I decided to record audio with my phone. I set it on a chair in the living room and left it running while I tried to sleep. I wanted to see if I could capture the sound of footsteps. I fell asleep around midnight, and sometime in the early morning, I woke up again. Same footsteps, same location. I forced myself to lie still. My pulse was pounding in my ears. I listened for at least a minute. Then I heard the faint sound of something brushing against the wall. It was quick, like a soft scrape. Eventually everything went quiet, and I drifted off again. In the morning I played back the recording. The audio was mostly quiet, just the hum of the refrigerator and some faint city noise from outside. Then, around 3:07 a.m., there was a sound. It wasn't loud, it was more like a soft thump, followed by a couple of quick taps. It definitely sounded like footsteps on a wooden floor. I felt my palms go sweaty listening to it. I replayed it 3 or 4 times. I couldn't explain it. I still have that file on my phone. After that, I started feeling paranoid. I kept checking the corridor whenever I passed by. I left lights on more often. The apartment felt tight and claustrophobic. The exposed brick, which I initially liked, started to bother me because it made me think of how old the place was. I realized people had probably lived there for decades, maybe more. I didn't know anything about them. The landlord told me the building was built in the 90s. That's about all I knew. I tried sleeping with my bedroom area closer to the window, thinking maybe I wouldn't hear the corridor so much. I moved my mattress to the other side of the living room. The first night in that new position, I still woke up to the sounds of light footsteps. They felt even closer, maybe because the corridor was just a few steps away from my new spot. I turned on my lamp and stared at the corridor. Nothing moved, but the cold draft hit me again, and my breath caught in my throat. One afternoon I thought about asking the landlord directly if there was some weird history in the apartment. I called him, but I chickened out and only asked about the squeaky floors. He said that some apartments in the building have old boards that make noise at night. He sounded casual about it. He didn't mention any complaints from previous tenants. I almost wanted to bring up the footsteps I kept hearing, but I didn't want to sound crazy. I let it go. I tried a few small measures to feel better. I placed a draft stopper at the main door, closed the bathroom door at night so it wouldn't echo, and even placed a small rug in the corridor to see if that changed the sound. The next time I heard the footsteps, the sound still came through. It was muffled by the rug, but it was there. That freaked me out more, because it meant the noise adapted to the changes I made. I couldn't pretend it was just the bare wood creaking. Sometimes I considered sleeping with the TV on all night, so I wouldn't hear anything. But I didn't want to ignore the problem. I wanted to confirm if it was really something in the apartment or if I was losing my mind. Over 2 weeks, I noted that it happened almost every night at various times, sometimes right after midnight. Other times it was around 3 a.m., or even later. There was no exact pattern except that it always happened in the middle of the night. I also tried staying up late to watch the corridor. I turned off all the lights except for a small lamp in the living room and sat on the couch and waited. Around 1 a.m., I heard a soft shuffle. My chest tightened. I leaned forward, staring at the corridor. My eyes felt dry from trying not to blink. I heard another soft step, but I couldn't see anything move. Then I felt that cold air rush across my ankles. I jumped to my feet and dashed toward the corridor, flipping the light switch on. The hallway was empty and the apartment was silent. I stood there with my heart racing. My arms felt tense, and I realized my fists were clenched. I had no idea how to fight this, or even how to understand it. I started spending more time out of the apartment. I would go to a coffee shop to work on my laptop, or visit friends. But every time I came home, I got that heavy feeling in my stomach. The corridor looked the same, the bricks looked the same, and the kitchen was still dim and shadowy. Some nights I considered renting another place, but I wasn't sure if I could break my lease without a real reason. I was also trying to save money. The rent in this place was pretty cheap for the area. One evening, I decided to do a final thorough search. I turned on every light. I opened every cabinet, closet, and drawer. I checked the space under the sink, behind the refrigerator, and under the bed. The entire apartment was empty except for my possessions. There was no hidden entrance or crawl space, no vents big enough for a person to hide in. After that, I sat on my couch and stared at the corridor. It was the same old corridor with chipped paint near the ceiling and a long overhead light that flickered sometimes. I felt this tense energy in my chest, but I tried to stay calm. That night, the footsteps came again. This time, I forced myself to speak out loud. I said, "Who's there?" My voice sounded shaky. The footsteps stopped. I felt the cold draft on my shoulder again. My hands shot up to feel if there was a breeze. There wasn't. It just felt cold, like someone stood right behind me. I didn't hear breathing or movement. I stayed still for a long time. Finally, I couldn't handle it. I got up, walked back to the living room, and left the overhead light on in the corridor.
I didn't sleep well.
I've been here for about a month now. Every night, I sense something moving around that corridor. It doesn't show up in photos. I haven't seen any figure or shape, but I can't ignore the footsteps or the cold spots. The walls are old, and I suspect they carry some leftover trace of whoever was here before, but I have no proof. There's no record of anything terrible happening in this building. No rumors, no dark stories. Still, I lie awake most nights, listening for those soft steps, wondering who or what is sharing this space with me. I haven't found an answer, and I'm not sure I ever will. All I know is that I'm not alone in my own apartment, and every night I wait for those footsteps to remind me. I never expected that drive to become one of the most unsettling moments of my life. I had finished a long meeting that night and was looking forward to getting home as soon as possible. It was almost 1 a.m., and I felt drained from all the hours I'd spent in that stuffy conference room. My plan was to take the main highway and avoid any unnecessary detours. But there was an accident on the main route, so I decided to follow a narrow back road that cut through some rural areas. I thought it would save me time. I was wrong. I turned off the main street and merged onto this narrow road. At first everything was dark but calm. I could see silhouettes of trees on my left and open fields on my right. My headlights lit up the asphalt directly in front of me, and the rest of the area was basically pitch black. Now and then, I caught sight of a few fence posts or a small mailbox. I expected the ride to be a bit eerie because it was late, but I didn't feel anxious at that point. I was mostly annoyed about how tired I felt, and I wanted to get home before I lost whatever energy I had left. As I kept driving, I realized there weren't any other cars on that road. I remember looking at my fuel gauge and making sure I had enough gas to reach the main highway again. Everything seemed normal for the next few minutes. The night was quiet. My phone was plugged into the charger, and I occasionally glanced at it to check if there was any signal. There wasn't. My car's interior felt cold because I had turned on the air conditioning earlier and forgotten to adjust it. The cold air helped me stay awake, so I kept it on. At some point, I saw a small wooden sign on the right side of the road. It was too dark to read it properly, but it looked old and worn out. I passed by a few driveways that led to houses set far back from the road. I didn't see any lights in the windows. Maybe everyone was asleep. I kept my eyes on the asphalt, moving at about 40 miles per hour, because the road felt narrow, and I didn't want to risk hitting a deer or some stray animal. The silence was thick, and the only sound came from the hum of my engine. Then I noticed something strange about 100 yards up ahead. It looked like a figure standing near a fence. I couldn't see it clearly at first, so I slowed down a bit. I thought maybe it was a person checking on some livestock or a field. I felt a slight chill in my arms, but I tried to ignore it. As I got closer, I saw that the figure was standing still, maybe a few feet away from the fence. It seemed to be turned sideways, like it was angled away from the road. My headlights caught part of its outline, and for a split second, I thought I saw the shape of a person's shoulder or head. I lowered my speed to around 20 miles per hour. Leaning forward, I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The fence was a simple wire fence attached to some wooden posts, and there was a patch of tall grass nearby. I remember feeling a sudden spike of tension. My breathing got shallow, and I gripped the wheel a bit tighter. I wondered if someone needed help, or if they were just out there for some reason, but it was almost 1 a.m., which didn't make much sense to me. As I approached, my headlights caught the figure fully for a brief moment. It looked like a man or woman. I really couldn't tell. The outline was slender, but the light didn't reveal any details of clothing or facial features. It seemed to be facing the fence, maybe half turned toward the road. For 1 or 2 seconds, I felt certain I was looking at a real person. Then, as I passed by that exact spot, I didn't see anyone. The fence was visible. The tall grass was there, but the figure was gone. I felt a jolt in my chest. My hands started trembling on the steering wheel. I tapped the brakes and brought the car to a stop on the shoulder. My first thought was that the person had crouched down or moved behind the fence, but I didn't see any motion in the grass, nor was there any sign of anyone running. The area was too open to hide that quickly. My heart pounded in my ears. I tried to breathe calmly, but it came out in short bursts. I switched on my hazard lights and looked through the passenger side window. I tried to see if there was any shape or shadow among the fence posts. It was difficult because there wasn't much moonlight, and my headlights were pointing forward. I couldn't see much to the side. My mind started racing. I asked myself if I was just tired or maybe seeing something that wasn't there. Still, my skin was crawling, and I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I gripped the steering wheel with one hand and reached for my flashlight with the other. I kept a small flashlight in the center console for roadside emergencies. My curiosity told me to step out of the car and check the fence line. My instincts told me to get the hell out of there. I opened the door slightly, and a gust of cool night air hit my face. I paused for a second. I could hear the distant chirping of crickets and the faint rustle of leaves. Everything else was silent. No voices, no footsteps. My pulse was beating so hard I felt it in my temples. I decided I wasn't comfortable getting out, so I quickly pulled the door shut again. I locked the doors out of habit, then turned off my hazard lights. I thought about calling someone, but I had no phone signal. Besides, what would I even say? I just saw a weird figure that disappeared near a fence. That sounded ridiculous. I put the car in drive and began moving forward at a slow pace. I kept glancing at my rear-view mirror. The road behind me stayed dark with no sign of movement. I told myself I was just imagining things, or maybe the person was actually there and slipped away in the darkness. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My heartbeat wouldn't slow down. My palms were damp, and I wiped them on my pants while steering with my left hand. A few minutes later, I picked up speed and headed back toward the main highway. The entire drive felt longer than it should have. I kept my eyes on the shoulders of the road, half expecting to see another figure. I scanned the fences, fields, and trees. Every time my headlights hit a post or tall plant, my stomach lurched a bit, worried it might be another human shape. But I didn't see anything else. I was alone on that road. I felt watched, though. It was like there were eyes on me from the darkness outside my beams of light. I kept checking my mirrors, rolling my shoulders to release some tension. Nothing helped. Eventually, I spotted a green sign indicating that the main highway was just a couple of miles ahead. I sped up, grateful that I'd soon be in a busier area with lights and maybe a gas station. When I finally merged onto the highway, I let out a long breath. My shoulders relaxed a bit and I leaned back in my seat. I tried to shake off that strange encounter, but my mind kept replaying the moment I saw that silhouette vanish. I felt a lingering shiver in my chest. When I got home, I parked in my driveway and shut off the engine. I sat there for a while in the dark. My neighborhood was silent, a single porch light across the street. lit up a patch of sidewalk. I stared at my steering wheel and thought about what had happened. I couldn't explain it. I felt too tired to dwell on it, so I forced myself to get out of the car. My legs were stiff and my back ached from the long drive. I locked the doors and dragged myself inside. I tried to sleep that night, but my mind kept drifting back to that fence and the figure. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that outline and felt the same wave of unease. My muscles tightened just thinking about it. I tossed and turned, waking up every few hours. By morning, I felt exhausted and a little irritable. I told myself it was probably just a trick of the light, or maybe just a random person who happened to be out there. I had never felt such an intense sense of dread before, though, and that bothered me. Over the next few weeks, I avoided that back road. I used the main routes and dealt with traffic rather than face that empty stretch again. Whenever I drove near that area at night, I tensed up without even realizing it. My grip on the wheel got tighter, and my pulse picked up speed. It became an automatic response whenever I thought about that fence line. I never told many people about it, either. I mentioned it briefly to a coworker, who joked that I was just seeing things because I was sleep-deprived. Maybe that was true, but something in my gut told me it was more than that. A month later, I had to stay late at work again. This time, I planned my route carefully. I wanted to avoid the back road altogether. However, I found out there was a major construction project on the main highway. The GPS app suggested a detour, and I recognized the same narrow road from before. I sighed and tried to see if there was another way around. It seemed everything else would add nearly an hour to my drive, so I decided to face it. I left the office around 11:30 p.m. The roads were mostly empty, and after about 20 minutes I reached the turnoff that led to that narrow stretch. My chest tightened the moment I recognized the surroundings. The houses were spaced far apart. The street lights ended, leaving only darkness ahead. I turned on my high beams. My eyes flicked from side to side, checking the fences and ditches. I tried to keep my thoughts steady. I focused on the lines in the road and the shape of each tree I passed. After a few miles, I saw that same fence off in the distance. I felt my stomach twist. My throat went dry. I slowed down again, but not too much. Part of me wanted to zip through without looking at anything. Another part of me felt drawn to check that exact spot. As I approached, I realized my heart was pounding faster. My hands were sweaty on the steering wheel, and I felt a faint pressure in my chest. This time, I didn't see anyone by the fence. It was just open grass, fence posts, and darkness. But as I passed that spot, I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. I couldn't tell if it was a person or just some animal darting off, but my heart leaped in my chest. I pressed the accelerator a bit more, trying to distance myself from that place. My rearview mirror was dark and empty. The road ahead looked the same as before, narrow and lonely. I inhaled deeply, trying to calm myself. My shoulders were tense, and my scalp felt prickly. I thought about pulling over and checking again, but my instincts told me not to. I kept driving until I merged onto the next well-lit road. My entire body felt drained, even though it was only a half-hour trip. The sensation of being watched stayed with me, like a weight in the pit of my stomach. I couldn't wait to get back to the busier streets and see other cars on the road. Finally, I saw the glow of traffic lights in the distance, and the familiar signs of small businesses that were closed for the night. I felt my chest loosen a bit. Now, every time I think about that back road, I remember that figure. It was there one moment, gone the next. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of my headlights, or maybe some local out in the fields. But I know how I felt at that moment. My pulse was racing. My fingers were stiff against the wheel. The air felt cold and heavy in the car, and I had this strong sense that I was being watched. I can't prove anything. I don't have photos or evidence, but I still feel uneasy when I recall that night. I haven't told many people about this incident. Most folks would shrug it off or laugh. I don't need anyone else's approval to know what I experienced. The memory alone is enough to make me avoid that road when it's dark out. I'd rather take an extra 20 or 30 minutes to drive home on well-lit roads with other vehicles around me. It's not that I'm scared of the countryside or the dark, but that particular spot has a strange grip on me. Every time I approach it, a chill spreads through my arms and neck, and I can't help but scan the fence line, expecting to see something that shouldn't be there. Even now, I can't explain it, but if I ever find myself on that road in the early hours of the morning again, I'll be on guard. I don't care if it's in my head or if there's some other explanation. All I know is I saw someone or something standing there, and when I got closer, it vanished without a trace. That's the part that keeps playing over in my mind. No movement, no sound, just gone. Sometimes my heart skips a beat if a shape on the roadside reminds me of that figure. It's just one of those things that happened, and I can't forget it. I'm not looking for answers anymore. I don't plan to investigate or wander around at night to prove anything. I just do my best to stick to the main roads. I'd rather deal with traffic and construction than drive through that narrow stretch again at 1 a.m. If I have to pass there, I keep my eyes forward, and I don't slow down. But I always stay alert for any figure near a fence because that sight still makes me shudder. I guess I'll never know if it was a real person or something else. Whatever it was, it left me with a feeling I can shake off. And that's why I don't like driving alone on deserted roads after midnight anymore. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy to get spooked by a faint sound in my headphones, but that's exactly what happened. I remember the first time it occurred. I was at the local gym, trying to improve my stamina on the indoor track. I'm not a professional athlete or anything, but I like to push myself. That day I put on my usual workout playlist, stepped onto the treadmill, and started running. Everything felt normal. I heard the music, the hum of the air conditioning, and the occasional thud of someone else's shoes on the track. Then I heard a whisper that didn't match any part of my song. It was so quiet and so close, like someone had pressed their mouth against a microphone and was barely speaking. It stopped for a second, then came back. It sent a jolt through me because I had no clue what it was. I figured it was some weird Bluetooth interference, so I brushed it off. I kept running, but stayed alert, waiting to see if that noise repeated. It did. After a few seconds, I heard that same low murmur. It wasn't music and it wasn't background chatter. It was like a soft voice, breathing out words I couldn't understand. The hair on my arm stood up, and I felt an uncomfortable tightness in my chest. I paused my treadmill, took out the earbuds, shook my head, and stopped running. No more whisper. I put the earbuds back in, started running again, and everything was fine for a while. But a minute later, that soft sound returned. It stayed with me for only a second or two, then faded away. I finished my run that day feeling annoyed, more than scared. The whisper had freaked me out a bit, but I assumed it was a technology glitch. I left the gym, went home, and spent the rest of the evening looking up possible reasons for this kind of audio distortion. I read about cell phone signals crossing with radio frequencies. I read about cheaply made earbuds. I told myself that was all it was. Maybe the wiring in the earbuds was messed up. I decided to buy a new pair. The next day, I went to the gym, determined to test my new earbuds. I got on the treadmill, played my music, and started at a slow jog. About 3 minutes in, the same whisper came through the new earbuds. It caught me so off guard that I nearly tripped. My stomach sank, and I felt a flush rising in my face. The gym was fairly quiet at that time, so I was painfully aware of every little sound in the place. Yet no one seemed to notice anything weird. Nobody was looking in my direction. That's when it hit me that this whisper might be happening only in my headphones. I tried to focus on the treadmill display, but my mind was racing. I didn't understand why a brand new pair of earbuds would have the same issue. The whisper didn't sound like random static. It felt intentional, like someone was right there next to me. I tried to ignore it and decided to push through my run, but I couldn't concentrate. Every time that faint, breathy voice broke through the music, my pulse jumped. My thighs felt heavier, and my feet started to drag. I was losing my rhythm. I switched playlists, but the whisper kept coming. Finally, I stopped the treadmill, took a breath, and looked around. The rest of the gym was just people minding their business. Some were on weight machines, some were on ellipticals. Nobody was near me with a phone that might be messing with my signal. I tried not to look paranoid, but my heart was pounding. I took off my earbuds and listened. Silence. All I could hear was the low hum of a fan and a couple of people breathing heavily as they lifted weights. I forced myself to finish some weight training that day and then went home. I tried to shake off the memory of that whisper, telling myself I'd download my music onto my phone so it wouldn't rely on a streaming signal. Maybe that would stop any interference. The next day, I tried exactly that. I went in with fresh energy, feeling confident. I set the treadmill to a steady pace, started running, and listened to my music from a local file on my phone. Everything seemed fine at first. Then, about 5 minutes into my run, the whisper returned. It wasn't just the same sound, it was the same weird pattern, like someone breathing and trying to form words. That chilled my entire back, and my scalp tingled. I turned my head, expecting someone to be behind me.
No one was there.
That's when I noticed something else. The whisper came at the same physical spot on the track. The gym has an indoor track circling the weight area, and I used a treadmill that faced one corner of that track. Every time my treadmill reached a certain point on its belt rotation, or maybe every time I looked in a particular direction, the whisper came in. It was too consistent to be random. I jumped off the treadmill, wiped my face with my towel, and checked behind the machine. There was nothing except a few wires and a standard outlet. I felt a pulsing in my temples, and my mouth went dry. I started thinking about bizarre explanations, but I didn't want to dwell on that. I just wanted to figure out a rational explanation. I left the gym right then, deciding I needed a break. Over the next week, I returned a few times and tried different gear. I changed my phone, I changed my earbuds again, and I even tried brand new headphones with a wire instead of Bluetooth. Each time, I heard the same whisper if I ran near that same spot. Even if I moved a few treadmills down, the whisper eventually found its way into my headphones once I was facing that portion of the track. The more it happened, the more I felt this creeping sensation at the back of my neck, like I was being watched. My stomach twisted every time that faint sound came through, and it always left me short of breath. One day, I decided to run without music. I figured if the whisper was some weird electromagnetic phenomenon, maybe I'd hear it even without playing anything. But I needed the headphones to block out the general noise, so I put them in without turning on any music. I heard nothing but the dull sound of my feet pounding on the treadmill and my own breathing. At first I felt relieved. There was no whisper. Then I realized something else. I got the sensation that someone was right next to me, just out of my field of vision. I jerked my head to the side. Nobody was there. My heart pounded even harder than usual. My skin felt cold, and I had goosebumps on my arms. I tried to keep going, but I felt unsettled, like the treadmill area had turned into a trap. After that attempt, I decided to talk to one of the gym employees. I casually asked if they ever got reports of weird sounds or signals interfering with headphones. The staff member gave me a confused look. He said he'd never heard of that happening. I asked if maybe there was some hidden Wi-Fi router or piece of equipment behind that corner of the track. He said not that he knew of. I looked around at the gym's layout. I saw some security cameras, but they were high up near the ceiling. I saw some emergency lights, a few vents, and the typical wall-mounted TVs. Nothing seemed out of place. I started feeling paranoid. I'd walk up to that corner of the track and just stand there, headphones in my ears, phone in my hand, trying to catch any static or weird frequency. Nothing would happen unless I started running on the treadmill. I started to wonder if the physical movement or the heartbeat triggered something in the headphones. That sounded ridiculous, but I couldn't deny my observations. So I forced myself to do a few short runs, just to see if I could catch a pattern. Sometimes the whisper came in almost immediately. Other times it waited until I had been running for a minute or two. But it always came before I got comfortable, and every time it happened, I felt that same rush of cold fear. A few nights later, I decided to stay late. The gym was open 24 hours, so I went in after midnight hoping I could experiment when it was nearly empty. It was just me and maybe 2 other people in the entire facility. The lights were dimmer because they usually turn off some overhead lighting at night. I felt uneasy as soon as I walked in. The place seemed too big and too quiet. My footsteps echoed. The front desk attendant waved at me without much enthusiasm. I went straight to the treadmills, put on my wired headphones, and started a slow run. I looked around between intervals. The 2 other people were busy with their own workouts, nowhere near me. At first, nothing unusual happened. I began to think maybe it was gone. Then, when I hit a steady pace, the whisper slipped into my headphones again. I swore under my breath, yanked the headphones out of my ears, and turned around. The gym was empty behind me. My heart hammered in my chest. I felt my pulse all the way to my fingertips. There was a strange tension in my jaw, and my legs felt weak. But I didn't leave. I stood there panting, my t-shirt soaked with sweat. I decided I needed to figure out if this was just in my head, so I put the headphones back on and walked on the treadmill. No whisper. Then I started a light jog. No whisper. Then I kicked up the speed to my usual pace. The whisper returned, soft and unsettling. I tried to pick out actual words, but it was too blurred and quiet. I only caught a few S and H sounds, like someone trying to speak but holding back. I slammed the stop button and leapt off the treadmill. I had to catch my breath. I could feel my thighs shaking from a mix of fear and exertion. I wiped the sweat from my forehead with my arm. I walked in a circle, my eyes darting around the room, but realized the other two people had left. It was just me and the night shift attendant in the entire gym. The hum of the air conditioner filled my ears. It felt colder than usual. I was completely on edge. I decided I had to confront the fact that this might be something unexplainable. I didn't want to dwell on ghosts or anything like that, but the more this kept happening, the less sense it made. I left the gym that night in a hurry. My calves burned from the sudden stop. I hopped in my car, locked the doors, and sat there for a moment. My breathing was ragged, and I was covered in cold sweat. My mind was swirling with questions. I turned on the radio, hoping for a distraction. The normal sound of music pouring out of my car speakers calmed me down a bit. At least I knew the car stereo wasn't haunted. That was a stupid thought, but my nerves were shot. Over the next few days, I tried to decide if I should just quit that gym, but I paid for a year-long membership, and I liked the equipment. I also didn't want to back down from something that might just be a glitch, so I returned during normal daytime hours, hoping it wouldn't be so creepy if more people were around. The place was busy when I walked in, which gave me a little sense of comfort. I hopped on a different treadmill as far away from that corner as possible. I cranked up the speed, put on my headphones, and tried to drown everything out with loud music. At first, I thought it was fine. Then I realized I could still sense that weird presence, like a mild static in my mind. I didn't hear a whisper, but I felt jumpy, scanning the mirrored walls to see if anyone was near me. Nobody was. Still, my nerves wouldn't settle. I felt a tightness in my chest, and my breathing grew shallow. Eventually, I went back to the original treadmill, telling myself that I needed to face this head-on, or I'd never get past it. As soon as I got up to speed, that whisper returned in my headphones. Same quiet, breathy sound. My hands clenched into fists. I mumbled to myself. I pushed the speed higher and forced myself to keep going, ignoring it as best I could. The whisper seemed to get more frequent, but I powered through for 5 full minutes. My legs were on fire and my lungs were burning. Then, in the middle of my run, the whisper cut out. It just stopped. I slowed down and eventually let the treadmill carry me to a stop. My shirt was soaked, and my arms trembled from a rush of adrenaline. I stood there for a minute, catching my breath. I didn't hear the whisper again. I can say I was relieved because I still felt like someone was standing behind me, watching me. My back crawled with tension, but I stayed there, letting the belt slow to a halt. I took out my headphones and looked around. No one gave me any odd looks or approached me. I realized I was on my own with this. I walked out of the gym feeling like I'd won a small victory by not running away the moment I heard that noise. But I also knew it probably wasn't over. Now, I keep going back. Sometimes the whisper appears. Sometimes it doesn't. I still get that cold feeling when I pass that certain part of the track. I've accepted that it's a part of my routine now. I try not to think about it too much. I've tested every bit of technology I can think of. I've asked the gym staff and I've looked for logical reasons. Nothing adds up. I haven't seen any actual person lurking around, and no one else mentions hearing anything like this. I stick to the treadmill because I don't want to abandon my workout goals. But every time I lace up my shoes and head to that gym, I feel a clench in my stomach. I walk through the doors telling myself, this time will be normal. Then I step onto the treadmill, start running, and eventually feel that slow, creepy whisper slip into my ears. It's unnerving, but I refuse to let it drive me away. I don't know if it's a technical glitch or something stranger. I just know it happens to me, and it doesn't stop. So I keep running, feeling that sensation of breath against my ear, waiting for the day it'll disappear for good. Until then, I can't help looking over my shoulder, expecting someone to be right behind me. No one is ever there. I don't know if I'll ever get used to it, but I keep trying, day after day, hoping one of these runs will be the one where everything is finally quiet again. I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped into that warehouse for my first night shift. It was just an instant feeling, a chill on my skin. Like the air inside was heavier than normal. The place looked ordinary enough. Wide concrete floor, tall metal shelves, and a few scattered pallets. but there was a strange tension clinging to every beam and every crate.
I tried to ignore it at first, thinking maybe I was just tired or maybe it was the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead.
But by the end of that first night, I realized this job wasn't going to be as simple as I'd hoped. My name's Mark. I'm 35 years old. For the last few months, I've been picking up side gigs wherever I can. My finances took a hit after I quit my old job and I needed quick money. That's why I agreed to work these graveyard shifts in an industrial warehouse on the outskirts of town. The schedule seemed easy enough. I show up at 10 p.m. and leave around 6 a.m. All I have to do is catalog boxes, update the inventory sheets, and make sure everything is in the right place. There's a security guard, but he only patrols outside. Inside, it's just me, a clipboard, a flashlight, and hundreds of boxes. The warehouse is huge, with a corrugated metal roof and walls featuring rows of tall shelves that reach almost all the way up to the rafters. Each aisle is lit by long fluorescent tubes, although a few of them flicker. The floor is plain concrete, with an echo of every step that's sharp and unsettling. On my first night, I walked up and down the aisles to get a feel for the layout. I noticed a few cold spots where drafts come in from small gaps in the walls. Everything smelled like dust and metal. My job was to note down which boxes were where, check for any damage, and make sure each pallet or crate matched the list on my clipboard. During that first week, I started feeling like something was off. I'd be checking the labels on a line of boxes, and I'd get the sudden urge to go. I couldn't see anything unusual, just more racks and industrial lighting. But there was this crawling sensation on the back of my neck. It felt like I was being watched from above. Sometimes I'd spin around to see if a bird or a cat had slipped inside, but I never found anything. I told myself it was just nerves. The place was silent except for the hum of the lights, and I was alone in a big empty building at night. It made sense that my mind would play tricks on me. But things started getting weird on the third or fourth night. I was in the far corner, checking a pile of old mechanical parts. Suddenly, I heard a scraping noise from across the aisle. It sounded like a crate being dragged on concrete. My heart pounded so fast I could feel it in my throat. I put my clipboard down and grabbed my flashlight. I walked around the corner, following the direction of the sound. But when I reached the spot, I couldn't see anything that looked out of place. All the crates stood in neat rows. None of them were moved, at least not that I could tell. I stood there for a few seconds trying to slow my breathing. I thought maybe I'd imagined it. I went back to my corner and tried to refocus on my list, but my eyes kept darting around. Every time I heard the tiniest sound, a pop from the metal shells contracting in the cold, a slight creak from the roof supports, I tensed up. An hour later, I heard the security guard's footsteps outside on his usual patrol. He never came in unless there was an emergency. I considered calling him inside just for company, but I didn't want to look paranoid, so I kept working, finishing the rest of my shift without any other strange noises. The following night was quiet at first. I moved through the aisles in my usual routine. I carried a small radio with me for background noise, but the reception was lousy inside the metal walls, so it mostly produced static. Around midnight, I started feeling that sensation again, like eyes watching me from the top of the shelves. I stopped for a moment and aimed my flashlight up. All I saw was steel beams, dust, and boxes stacked to the ceiling. But the hairs on my arms stood up and my stomach felt tight. I wanted to tell myself it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Around 2 a.m., I walked toward the main corridor that runs through the center of the warehouse. The light there is brighter because that's where most loading and unloading takes place during the day. But I found a stack of boxes blocking the path. They weren't there an hour before. They were piled in a way that made it impossible for me to pass without moving them. I set my clipboard down on a nearby pallet and started pushing the boxes aside. I looked around for any sign of someone else. It's possible that some day shift employee moved them and forgot to put them back. But the day shift manager had told me that the aisles were always kept clear, and these boxes weren't random. They seemed arranged almost like a barricade. I felt a rush of adrenaline. My hands got clammy, and I kept swallowing hard. I thought someone might be messing with me. Once I cleared the boxes, I searched each aisle for any sign of another person. The warehouse was silent, except for my own footsteps. No one was hiding behind crates or on top of any shelves. I started telling myself that maybe my mind was jumping to conclusions. Could those boxes have fallen off a pallet? They seemed too neatly stacked for an accident. I kept glancing up toward the high beams and scanning each walkway between shelves. Later that same night, while I was listing some new shipments near the loading dock, I thought I heard a shuffling sound above me. It was like heavy feet walking across the top of a row of shelves. I clicked off my radio and held my breath. I aimed my flashlight straight up, but I only saw metal frames and more boxes. The noise stopped. My pulse throbbed, and I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I waited there for maybe 30 seconds, feeling sweat gather at my temples, but there was nothing else. Just the sound of the shuffling. It could have been a draft or the building settling. I kept thinking about raccoons or rats, but that noise seemed too strong for small animals. When the shift ended, I walked outside, locked the door, and told the security guard about the boxes in the corridor. He just shrugged and said he hadn't seen anyone enter or leave. He checked his log and confirmed no alarms had gone off and he hadn't heard anything. I drove home feeling unsettled. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I pictured those towering shelves and the weird shadows above. A few nights later, I arrived at work with a plan. I wanted to rule out my own paranoia, so I brought a cheap digital camera. I figured I'd snap a few pictures of the warehouse, check them, and see if there was any sign of movement in the background. Around midnight, I took some shots of each aisle, especially near the top shelves, but when I reviewed them on the tiny screen, I couldn't make out anything unusual. Everything looked the same in every photo, just rows of metal racks, cardboard boxes, and the dull reflection of the overhead lights. After that, I tried to focus on my actual job. I walked through each section, checking items off my list. I pushed through the boredom and reminded myself I was getting paid time and a half for the shift. Things were quiet for several hours. Then, as I was closing out the final aisle, I heard that dragging noise again, the same one I had heard on my third night. I froze. I clutched my flashlight so tight my knuckles cracked. The sound was coming from somewhere near the forklift station in the back of the warehouse. That area is out of the way. Most of the crates there are old stock that rarely gets touched. I forced myself to move. Each step felt heavy, like my legs were weighed down by cinder blocks. My mouth was dry. I rounded the corner, shining my light around. At first I didn't see anything unusual. A couple of empty pallets stood by the wall, and a few sealed crates were stacked in a corner. Then I noticed that one of the crates near the forklift had shifted about a foot away from where it had been. The scrape marks on the concrete were fresh, with a little debris line where the crate had scraped the floor. I looked around for any forklift tracks. The forklift was parked and locked. No sign that anyone had used it. I rubbed my eyes and tried to think rationally. That crate was definitely moved. But how and why? As I stepped closer, I felt a sudden rush of air above me. It was like a quick, silent whoosh. I pointed my flashlight upward, but I only caught a glimpse of something along the beams. It could have been a piece of plastic fluttering or maybe a large bird. The beam of my flashlight shook because my hand was trembling. I couldn't see anything else. My pulse was racing, and my forehead was damp with sweat. I got an urgent feeling that I shouldn't linger. I left that corner and headed straight for the exit. I still had an hour left in my shift, but I decided it wasn't worth it. I told the guard I wasn't feeling well, and I drove home. The next day, I spent trying to decide what to do. I needed the money, but I also felt uneasy about what was happening. The rational side of me said that maybe the building was old, and things were shifting around. Maybe someone had a key and was sneaking in to prank me. It was also possible I was working too many nights in a row, and my mind was creating illusions. But I remembered the fresh scrape marks. That was real. I decided to keep the job but stay more alert. On my next shift, I arrived early. I walked around with the day supervisor, asking about any weird noises or misplaced boxes. He said he hadn't noticed anything unusual, but he mostly worked in the office and only came out for routine checks. At 10 o'clock, everyone else left, and it was just me again. I double-checked each aisle, making note of where items were, especially the ones that had moved before. I told myself that if something changed, I'd see it right away. That night felt like the longest shift I'd ever worked. I'd do a few tasks, then stop and listen, shining my flashlight in the direction of any tiny sound. A few times I heard something scuttle above me, but it was faint, like it might have been a pigeon or a rat. I couldn't get a clear view. Around midnight, I found another pile of boxes stacked in a weird formation near the center aisle. They weren't there earlier in the evening. It was like someone was trying to block my path again, but this time it was smaller boxes, so I moved them aside easily. I felt a surge of anger. This felt deliberate, like I was being toyed with. I walked over to the security door and popped my head outside. The guard was standing near the fence, staring out at the road. I asked if he'd seen anyone enter. He said no. I pressed him about the possibility of someone sneaking in. He just shook his head and said the place was locked down. I went back inside, double-locked the door behind me, and returned to my list. My hands were shaking. My stomach felt like it was in knots. I kept telling myself to calm down, but my chest felt tight. 2 hours before dawn, I was up on a small stepladder, checking some inventory on the higher shelf. That's when I heard something shift behind me. It was the sound of metal scraping against metal, like a shelf being pushed. I turned around so fast, I almost lost my balance. My flashlight beam swept across the row, but I only saw stationary racks. The sound was definitely close, though. I climbed down the ladder, my knees feeling shaky. I walked down the aisle, scanning every box. Nothing was out of place. Then a loud thump echoed from the row next to me. My heart hammered against my ribs. I hurried around the corner and found a small metal box on the floor. It had been on the second shelf the day before, but now it was lying on its side. The label was still intact. I glanced up at where it was supposed to be. Nothing else was disturbed. It was like the box had been pushed off. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. My hands tingled. It was that same sensation I'd gotten before, like something was right above me. I took a few steps back and pointed the flashlight toward the ceiling. The overhead lights flickered a bit. In the glare, it was hard to see any detail up there. Everything looked still. I heard my own breath in the silence. I picked up the metal box, set it on the shelf, and backed away. The rest of the night I stuck to the well-lit areas near the entrance. I kept my radio on even though it was mostly static. It made me feel less alone. When dawn finally came, I almost ran out of the building. I handed the keys to the guard and said I was done for the night. He gave me a strange look, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get in my car and leave. I drove home shaking. I felt exhausted, not just from lack of sleep, but from the stress of feeling watched and stalked by something I couldn't see. Now, every time I step inside that warehouse, my nerves go on high alert. I watch every corner, every shelf, and every shadow. I still don't have a logical explanation for what's happening. All I know is that things keep moving or falling. I keep hearing those scraping sounds, and worst of all, I keep feeling those eyes on me whenever I step between those tall metal racks. I'm not sure how much longer I can stand it, but until I find a better job, I have no choice. Every night, I walk in with my clipboard and heart pounding. And every night, I wait for the next strange sound to echo through the aisles, reminding me that I'm not alone in there. I woke up on my second morning in that rented house and heard a thump overhead. It was short and dull, like something shifting on creaky boards. I hadn't planned on dealing with any surprises that early, but the sound got stuck in my head. When I first looked at this house, the realtor told me about the attic, saying nobody had stepped foot there in years.
He showed me the retractable staircase in the hallway, a thin wooden ladder hidden behind a small square panel in the ceiling.
He flipped it down to prove it worked, but we didn't climb up. I remember him shrugging and saying, "It's nothing, just a dusty space." I rented the place because it was affordable and close to my job. I didn't expect anything luxurious. The house is one floor with a tiny living room, a cramped kitchen, one bedroom, and a small bathroom off to the side. Everything is old. The walls have cracks in the corners near the ceiling, and the floor has some scratched tiles. The front door is chipped at its edges, and the windows rattle in strong winds. It's not ideal, but I was fine with it. I just needed a quiet spot to focus on work. On my first night, I heard strange creaks from above. I thought it was just the wood in the attic expanding and contracting. I'd heard that old houses do that, and I didn't think much of it. Good. The next morning, that thump made me pay more attention. It came around 6 in the morning, right as I was getting out of bed. It sounded like someone dropped a small box on the floor up there. I froze for a second and held my breath. The house went silent again. I told myself it was the wood shifting, maybe from temperature changes. I forced myself to ignore it. I had to get ready for work. Throughout that day, I felt on edge. Every time I remembered that noise, my stomach clenched. I tried to keep busy at the office, but I ended up glancing at the ceiling whenever I heard a squeak or a vibration from the ventilation system. When I got home that evening, I stared at the attic panel in the hallway. It's just a small square of wood, a bit crooked. One corner is darker, probably from years of dust and cobwebs. I looked around my hallway light fixture. It flickers sometimes. The combined effect made everything feel eerie. Still, I told myself to quit overthinking. I microwaved some leftovers, ate in the living room, and turned on the TV to fill the silence. Around 9 at night, there was a faint creaking from the ceiling. I turned the TV volume down. The sound seemed to move slowly, like footsteps crossing from one side of the attic to the other. My body tensed, and I could feel my heart beating hard. My first thought was that an animal might be up there. Maybe a raccoon or a stray cat had gotten in somehow. I tried to calm down by telling myself that old attics attract pests. I decided I'd check the attic in the morning. I don't like going into tight spaces at night. It felt too unsettling. Instead, I went to bed a bit earlier than usual, hoping to sleep through any noise. I woke up a few times in the middle of the night because I thought I heard a soft scrape or shuffle. Every time, I told myself I was half dreaming. Eventually, the sun rose and I felt more at ease. That morning, I went to the hallway and opened the attic panel. The retractable ladder squeaked when I pulled it down. Dust rained onto the floor. I stood on the bottom step, aiming my flashlight into the darkness above. I could see old wooden beams, a few spider webs, and random cardboard boxes stacked in corners. The air felt stale, like nobody had opened that space in a long time. I climbed up, coughing from the dust. My eyes watered. The attic was cramped, with a low ceiling and a musty smell. The flashlight beam caught swirls of dust floating near my face. I didn't see any holes or broken vents. I scanned each corner looking for raccoon droppings or signs of an animal nest. I didn't see much, just more dusty boxes and a few scattered tools. Everything was layered in thick grime. I decided to move slowly around the space, checking for any obvious entry points. The wood beneath my feet creaked with each step. That made me uneasy, but I kept going. I saw old newspapers stacked near one box, and some of them were from 10 years ago. Most boxes were unlabeled. One was open on top. It had old clothes inside, probably from a previous occupant. But I didn't see any living creatures. But I also didn't poke around too much. My breathing felt heavy because of the dust, and my palms were sweaty. I noticed the attic had no windows, just darkness beyond the range of my flashlight. I felt like the corners of the space were hiding something, even though I couldn't see it. I tried to push that thought away. Just when I decided to head back down, I heard a faint noise behind me. It sounded like wood straining under weight. I spun around, holding the flashlight in front of me, but nothing was there. My heart pounded. The air felt hot around my face. I wanted to get out of that attic. I took quick steps back to the opening. On my way, I nudged a stack of boxes, and they shifted with a scratching sound. I swallowed hard and forced myself not to look back. I climbed down, shoved the panel shut, and stood there in the hallway, breathing fast. My shirt clung to my back. I told myself I was spooking easily because it's an unfamiliar place. I convinced myself there was nothing there. It was just me, dust, and old junk. I got a drink of water and tried to calm down, but the noises didn't stop. Over the following days, I heard soft thumps, scratches, and sometimes a dragging sound at night. It wasn't constant, but it came in short bursts, maybe a few times an hour after sunset. I caught myself holding my breath, waiting for the next noise, which put me on edge. After work on Thursday, I decided to call the realtor and ask if there was any known issue with animals in the attic. He sounded dismissive and said he'd never heard of that problem. He suggested I call pest control if I was worried about it. I hung up, annoyed. There was no real help there. The weather turned cloudy that same afternoon. The sky was gray, and the house felt dim. I paced around the living room, thinking about the attic. I couldn't shake the idea that something was moving around up there. I rummaged through my closet and found a heavier flashlight. I also grabbed a broom handle, thinking it might help me feel safer. Around 5, I went to the hallway and pulled the ladder down again. I climbed up, heart pounding, and pushed my head through the opening. The attic smelled stagnant, like old cardboard and damp wood. The air felt thick on my face. I flicked on the flashlight and pointed it around. The boxes looked the same, scattered in random piles. I stepped up fully into the attic, using the broom handle to gently push aside some of the boxes. There was a thin layer of dust, so I could see if there were footprints. I looked around, but all I saw was my own shoe prints from the other day. I moved deeper into the attic, shining the light on the rafters. I tapped the floor with the broom, checking for loose boards. Everything seemed solid enough, though it creaked with every step. I stood there, listening to the sound of my own breathing, waiting to hear anything unusual. All I heard was the distant hum of a car outside. I wandered over to a stack of boxes that looked more recent. The top box had some household items, an old blender, a broken lamp, and a few wires. I nudged it aside and checked behind it. More boxes, all taped shut. I was about to move back when I heard a slight creak a few feet behind me. It felt like a shift in the air, like something else was there. I swung the flashlight around quickly. The beam illuminated piles of junk, but I didn't see any creature. My face felt hot, and I realized I was trembling slightly. I backed toward the opening, staying alert. I didn't want to run, but I wanted to leave. Right as I reached the ladder, I heard another sound. It was a soft scraping noise, like someone sliding a box across the floor. I froze. I turned around, pointing the flashlight at the boxes. They looked undisturbed, but that scrape had been clear as day. It wasn't my imagination. I waited a few seconds, gripping the broom handle tightly. My pulse throbbed in my neck. Then everything went quiet. I climbed down slowly, shut the panel, and locked myself in the bedroom for a while. I tried to make sense of it. I thought maybe the house was settling, or that there was some wind pushing against a loose board. But that scraping sound felt too precise. I felt an itching in my gut that I couldn't explain. That night, the noises were more frequent. I heard short taps, a faint scuttling sound, and something like a soft shuffle across the ceiling. Every time I heard it, my breath caught in my throat. My mind filled with images of a person crawling around up there. I kept looking at the hallway door, expecting it to swing open, but it never did. I sat on the couch in the dark, TV off, just listening. The house felt like it was breathing around me, shifting and groaning. I tried to get up and do something, but my legs felt shaky. I sat there until midnight, staring at the ceiling. On Friday morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I was frustrated, sleep-deprived, and angry at myself for being so nervous. I decided to do a thorough search during the day when I felt braver. At noon, I pulled the ladder down again, flashlight in hand, broom handle in the other. My plan was to check every corner. I wanted to see if there were small holes or hidden spaces I'd missed. Maybe there was a nest behind some boxes. I took my time. I moved boxes and set them aside. The air was heavy with dust, and I coughed a lot. I found a couple of old trunks. This one had clothing in it, thick coats and musty sweaters. Another was full of books. When I opened the book trunk, I sneezed from the dust cloud. The pages were yellowed and brittle. Some were magazines from over a decade ago. Nothing out of the ordinary, just abandoned personal belongings. I checked the corners of the attic floor, shining my flashlight on the edges. I found a tiny crack in one corner, but it was too small for anything bigger than a rat to squeeze through. I didn't see any rodent droppings or fur. I tapped the beams with the broom handle, listening for hollow spots. Everything sounded solid. After almost an hour, I was sweating and tired, but I hadn't found any sign of an animal or a person. I felt irritated and confused. The noises at night were real, but I couldn't see any cause. I left the attic, went to the kitchen and drank a glass of water. My throat felt scratchy from the dust. I stared at the ceiling, still wondering if there was a hidden area I hadn't noticed. The attic is small, and I checked every part. I tried to think logically. Maybe the noises were just the house's old frame, but the realtor never mentioned structural issues, and those scraping sounds felt deliberate. That afternoon, the sky turned dark again. Clouds covered the sun, making the interior of the house gloomy. Around 5, I heard a soft series of creaks overhead. It almost sounded like someone pacing. My shoulders tensed. I exhaled and told myself to relax. I decided to turn on music in the living room to block out the creaks, but they cut through every quiet moment. I wanted to yell at them to stop. That evening, I ordered pizza, ate half, and left the rest in the fridge. I didn't feel hungry, but I needed something in my stomach. The house was still. Then around 10, a muffled thump echoed above me. I jumped off the couch and walked to the hallway. I looked at the attic panel. My mouth felt dry. The panel seemed normal, not out of place, not shaking. I stood there for a long minute, waiting for another sound. Then I heard a slow, dragging noise, like something being pulled across the floor of the attic. My skin prickled and my heart started pounding hard. I grabbed the broom handle, which I'd left in the corner of the living room. I positioned myself under the panel, half expecting it to open from the other side. It stayed shut. I thought about ripping the panel down and confronting whatever was up there, but I just stood there, shaking. I felt sweat on my forehead. My mind raced with questions. Was somebody sneaking in? Had the realtor lied? Or was I losing it? I stared at the closed panel for another minute or two, but nothing else happened. Then just as I turned to walk away, I heard a single sharp creak right above me. I stopped breathing for a second. My eyes locked on the panel, but still, it stayed closed. I backed away, step by step, until I reached the living room. That was yesterday. I didn't sleep much last night. I lay in bed, listening for every little sound. I heard faint pops and shifts in the wood, but nothing as loud as before. Morning eventually came, and now I'm here on my couch, telling you everything. I feel anxious, but I also feel a strange urge to go up there one last time with a stronger flashlight, maybe a camera, to document whatever's making that noise. Yet every time I imagine climbing that ladder, my chest tightens and my hands shake. I keep glancing at the attic panel as I talk. I imagine something behind it, breathing slowly, waiting. The house is quiet at the moment, but I don't trust it. The nights are the worst. I'm torn between wanting to figure this out and wanting to leave it alone. Part of me wants to seal that attic entrance shut with nails or something, but the other part wants to rip every box open and check every inch. I have no proof of anything out of the ordinary, aside from the noises. No footprints, no droppings, no damage, just that oppressive feeling whenever I am up there, like the air itself is pushing in on me. I can't explain it. I can only feel it, and not sure what to do next. If I call pest control, they might set traps, but what if they find nothing? If I call the realtor, hell just shrug again. I've been thinking about it all day. Maybe I'll stay up late tonight and try to record the sounds on my phone. Then I'll have evidence to show someone. Or maybe I'll pack a few bags and spend a night at a friend's place just to see if a little distance helps me think clearly. Right now, though, I'm just staring at the ceiling, waiting for that next jolt, that next shuffle. My stomach feels knotted. The attic is still, and not sure if that's a relief or a warning. I guess I have two choices: open it up again, or leave it alone. But every time I think of climbing that ladder in the dark, my legs go numb. I can't decide. I'm stuck here listening, waiting, not sure if I should confront whatever's in that attic, or just stay as far away as possible. And I still have no idea if it's just the old house settling or something else up there. Taking quiet steps across the beams, moving boxes in the shadows and listening for any sound that might respond. I never expected to find myself wide awake in a dim hotel room at 2 a.m, staring at the foot of my bed with my heart pounding. I had assumed my trip would be routine. I was in town for a 3-day conference, and I chose this old hotel in the downtown area because I heard the building had character. I liked historical architecture. The place was built in the late 19th century with thick wooden doors, long hallways and high ceilings. The lobby smelled like old leather and the faint scent of polish, probably from the antique furniture. When I arrived, I noticed the walls had faded wallpaper with small floral patterns. The front desk stood in front of a wide staircase, and the receptionist greeted me with a polite but slightly distant smile. I checked in around 5 p.m. The receptionist, a tall guy in a crisp shirt, handed me a heavy metal key. It wasn't a plastic card like most modern hotels. He said, "You're in room 307, down the hall on the 3rd floor near the end. You'll have a quiet stay. Let me know if you need anything." I took my suitcase and headed up the creaky staircase. Every step groaned under my weight, and I felt like I was walking through another era. The hallway on the 3rd floor was longer than expected. The carpet felt plush under my shoes, but the lighting was weak. A few bulbs along the corridor cast a dull yellow glow. When I reached my room, I noticed it was at the very end of the corridor. There was a small window next to the door, but the glass was frosted, so I couldn't see outside. The air felt heavy and a little stale. My room had tall windows on the far side, but the drapes were thick and dark. The bed was a sturdy wooden frame with a simple mattress and plain white sheets. There was a single lamp on a nightstand, a dresser against the wall, and a chair by the window. The bathroom door was to the right, near the entrance. The place wasn't fancy, but it seemed clean enough. On the first night, I fell asleep without any trouble. I was exhausted from the trip and the long day of sessions at the conference. I turned off the lamp and the room went nearly pitch black, except for a thin strip of light that leaked in from under the door. I didn't hear a single noise from the corridor that night. No footsteps, no voices. It was so quiet that I slept straight through until my alarm went off the next morning. The second day of the conference was busy. I attended workshops, had coffee with some colleagues, and then grabbed a quick dinner. I got back to the hotel around 8 p.m. I noticed the lobby was nearly empty. A lone staff member stood behind the desk, looking at a computer screen. I walked straight to the stairs and climbed back to my room. The hallway lights flickered once when I passed the midpoint of the corridor. The old wiring probably needed work. I took a hot shower, changed into my pajamas, and lay down. I read a few pages of a report I had to review, then turned off the lamp. Again, I slept without any issues. On the third night, everything changed. I came back late because I went for a drink with a colleague. It was around 10 p.m. when I walked into the hotel. The receptionist at that hour was different. A middle-aged woman with short hair. She nodded at me as I passed. I noticed a slight draft near the base of the stairs, which made me shiver for a moment. I headed up, and the corridor felt colder than usual. The lights had the same dull glow, and the far end of the hallway looked darker than I remembered. I reached my door and fumbled with the old key. It always took a few seconds to turn because the lock was stiff. Finally, the door clicked open, and I entered. I changed into shorts and a t-shirt, brushed my teeth, and got into bed. It was around 11 p.m. I set my phone alarm for 7 a.m., checked a few messages, and dozed off. At some point in the middle of the night, I felt something unusual. It was like a soft breeze on my face. I thought maybe I left the window open, but I hadn't touched it since I arrived. I rolled over, half asleep. Then I heard a faint noise. It sounded like a low whisper coming from somewhere very close, maybe at the foot of the bed or near the dresser. I opened my eyes. I kept still. My pulse jumped. My first thought was that someone had broken in. I listened carefully, waiting to hear footsteps or breathing. The whisper continued. I couldn't make out any actual words, but the tone seemed urgent, almost pleading. I felt goosebumps rise on my arms. My throat went dry. I reached for the lamp, fumbling with the switch. My hand was shaking a bit. When the light turned on, the room looked empty. The door was still locked. The curtains were undisturbed. The dresser was closed. There was no one there. I rubbed my eyes and looked around again. The whisper had stopped the moment the light came on. I tried to call myself. I told myself it could have been a dream. Maybe I was mixing real sounds with a half-conscious state, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was right next to me. I got up and checked the entire room. I opened the bathroom door, checked behind the shower curtain, and even glanced under the bed. I found nothing. I felt a little embarrassed standing there in my t-shirt, sweating, heart racing, looking for something that didn't exist. I switched off the light and tried to go back to sleep. It took me at least an hour to calm down. I kept my eyes shut, but every little creak in the old building made me flinch. Eventually, I drifted off from sheer exhaustion. The next morning, I woke up feeling uneasy. I didn't have time to dwell on it because I had to rush to the conference. After the sessions ended around 4 p.m., I went back to the hotel. This time, the first thing I did was talk to the receptionist. It was the same tall guy who had checked me in. I told him that last night, I thought I heard whispering in my room. It felt really close, but nobody was there. I tried to sound casual. He gave me a small, polite smile. Sometimes the old corridors carry sound in strange ways, he said. You might have heard someone in the hallway, or maybe from another room. I nodded, but I remembered how clear it was. It hadn't sounded muffled or distant at all. It was right there. I went back upstairs. I had a couple of hours before dinner with some people from the conference, so I decided to check the windows. I wanted to be sure there were no drafts or cracks that could explain the soft breeze I felt. I tugged at the window frames, but they were sealed tight. The glass was intact. No air came through. I also noticed there wasn't an air vent anywhere near the bed. The only one was near the ceiling across the room. I stood there, feeling a small knot in my stomach. I remembered the sensation of breath on my face. There was nothing logical that explained it. That night, I tried to distract myself by chatting with colleagues at a nearby bar. We laughed about typical work stuff, had a couple of beers, and parted ways around 9 p.m. I walked back to the hotel. The streets in this downtown area were mostly deserted. I noticed the old storefronts had their lights off, and only a few street lamps were on. When I reached the lobby, I felt an odd sense of relief to see people there. A few guests were in armchairs, flipping through magazines. The receptionist was helping someone check in. I forced a smile and headed up the stairs. I told myself the whisper was just in my head. The corridor on the 3rd floor was dead silent. My footsteps seemed louder than usual, like the carpet couldn't mute the sound enough. The lights were flickering again. I reached my door, unlocked it, and went inside. I locked the door behind me, placed my suitcase against it, and turned on both the lamp and overhead light. I decided to leave the room lit while I got ready for bed. I brushed my teeth, changed into pajamas, and then debated whether to turn the lights off. I felt a bit silly, but I switched off the overhead light and left the lamp on. It took me a while to fall asleep. I stared at the ceiling, noticing the old plaster. Sometimes after midnight I drifted off, then jolted awake again. This time I didn't just hear the whisper. I felt a light brush against the back of my neck, like a gentle exhale. My eyes snapped open, and my body tensed. I heard the same urgent whisper, soft and fast. It was right by my ear, not across the room. I sat up so quickly that I almost knocked over the lamp. The whisper stopped, and the air turned silent. I looked around in panic. The door was still locked. The window was still closed. The only sound was my own breathing, loud and uneven. I jumped out of bed. I stood by the dresser, my heart hammering. I felt a chill run down my arms. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was dark, with no one passing by. I moved to the window and pulled the drapes aside. There were a few streetlights outside, but I couldn't see anyone close to the building. I felt exposed, standing by the window, so I stepped back. The room seemed empty, yet I could almost sense someone there. It was the strangest feeling. It felt like being watched, even though my eyes told me I was alone. I turned on the overhead light and left it on for the rest of the night. I stayed awake, leaning against the headboard, flipping channels on the small TV, trying to kill time until morning. Around 6 a.m. I got up, showered, and dressed. I left the room, locked it, and made my way downstairs for an early checkout. I didn't want to spend another night there. My conference was officially over, and I only needed a few hours to wrap up some final details. I felt tired but determined to leave. The receptionist on duty was the middle-aged woman with short hair. She looked up and gave me a quick smile. I told her I wanted to check out. "Is everything okay?" she asked. I hesitated, then said, "I've been hearing whispers in my room. I know it sounds strange, but it felt like someone was there." She kept a neutral expression and said, "Some guests say they hear odd noises here from time to time. It's an old building. Floors creak, pipes make sounds. Maybe that's what you heard." I didn't feel like arguing. I just wanted to settle my bill and get out. After we settled the payments, I walked back to the 3rd floor to grab my luggage. I used the key one last time. The corridor was silent as usual, but the air felt thick, like there was a low-pressure feeling in the hallway. I grabbed the handle of my suitcase, zipped up my laptop bag, and took one final look around. The bed was unmade, the lamp was off, and the overhead light was on. The space felt tense, as if it were waiting for something. I closed the door behind me. Just as I was about to lock it, I heard that same hushed whisper again, this time from right behind me in the corridor. I felt a light rush of air on the back of my neck, and a wave of chills spread across my shoulders. My hand froze on the doorknob. I didn't turn around. I just stood there, breathing quietly. The whisper was too soft to understand, but it lasted a couple of seconds, then stopped. I exhaled, locked the door, and walked away without looking back. My legs felt shaky as I reached the stairs. Once I was in the lobby, I walked outside into the daylight. My chest felt tight. I saw people rushing to work, cars passing by. Sunlight hit the old brick walls of nearby buildings. Life looked normal out there. I tossed my bags into the trunk of my car and drove off. On the way, I tried to distract myself with radio news and music. I felt a lingering sense of confusion. I kept replaying the moments when I heard the whispers. I couldn't dismiss them as mere dreams each time I was aware, awake, and alert. I never got an explanation for what happened. I told a few people I trust, and they shrugged it off as stress or overactive imagination. I don't believe that. The sound was too distinct, and the breeze on my neck was impossible to ignore. I'm just relieved I left without any further incidents. Sometimes old buildings have histories that seep into everyday moments. I don't know if that's what happened, I only know what I heard and felt. Even now, when I think back to that hotel room, I remember the chill in the air, the sudden whisper, and that soft breath on my neck. I have no desire to go back there. I'd rather stay in a chain hotel, even if it's bland. At least I can count on sleeping without looking over my shoulder in the middle of the night. I woke up one morning, opened my closet, and felt my stomach drop. The box of old photos was in the middle of my ties again. I didn't understand how it got there. I remembered placing it on a higher shelf the previous night. I knew I had stacked it behind a few other boxes, and I was sure I'd done it carefully. There was no reason for it to be on the tie rack. It looked out of place, like it had just been dropped there. I stood in front of the closet for a few seconds, rubbing my eyes. I didn't see any signs of forced movement. Nothing else in the closet seemed disturbed. But that box, with its dusty edges and taped lid, sat right on top of my ties. I live alone. No one else has a key to my apartment. My building has decent security. The front door is always locked, and there's a camera in the lobby. I couldn't imagine anyone slipping in without me knowing. Still, I started second-guessing myself right away. Maybe I had absent-mindedly moved the box while looking for something else, but I couldn't recall doing that. The idea of losing track of my own actions made me uneasy. I tried to brush it off as a random lapse of memory. I put the box back where I thought it belonged, and left for work. My nerves were on edge for the rest of the day, but I told myself it was nothing. A week passed, and I forgot about it. Then, on a Monday morning, I opened the closet to grab a tie again. The box was there in front of the ties. My chest tightened, and I felt a sharp jolt in my stomach. This time, I was sure I hadn't touched that box since the last incident. I hadn't even opened the closet except to hang up a few shirts over the weekend. I stared at the box for a while, wondering what could be happening. I didn't hear any noises during the night, nor did I see anyone come in or out of my place. The rest of my apartment looked normal. No drawers were open. Nothing was missing. I felt a chill go up my back and decided to do a quick inspection. I took the box out, placed it on the floor, and opened it. It had my old photos from college, some pictures from a trip I took years ago, and a few random snapshots of me and friends. Nothing in the box seemed unusual. I flipped through the pictures. They were in the same order as before. I tapped the walls inside the closet, checking for loose panels or hidden compartments. I examined the floor for any signs of shifting boards. Everything seemed solid. The closet door was old but didn't look warped. No hinges were broken or cracked. The shelf looked steady. There was no reason for the box to move. I moved it to a different shelf and left it there, making sure to note exactly where I placed it. Then I got dressed and left for work, my mind racing. Over the next few days, I checked that closet every night before bed. I kept my ties in one spot, and I left the box of photos on the other shelf. Every night it stayed put. Then, on Friday morning, I opened the closet again. The box was back on the tie rack. My throat went dry, and my heart pounded. I stood still, staring at the box. My arms felt tense. I closed the closet door and opened it again, as if that would change anything. Of course, the box was still there. I ran my hand through my hair and let out a long breath. I felt a knot in my gut. I decided to test things more systematically. I didn't want to rely on memory alone. That night, I used my phone's camera to snap a picture of the closet before I went to sleep. I took 2 pictures, one of the closet as a whole, and one focusing on the shelf where I put the box of photos. I also left a piece of tape on the lid, lined up with a mark on the box so I'd know if anyone opened it. Then I tried to fall asleep but kept tossing and turning. Every little creak in my apartment made me jump. I kept thinking someone was in the hallway or maybe in the living room. But when I got up to check, everything was quiet and still. The next morning I felt a surge of anxiety as I walked to the closet. I opened the door slowly, keeping my phone in hand. The box was in a different compartment again. It wasn't on the tie rack, but it had somehow moved to the lower shelf, where I store some old sweaters. My pictures from the night before showed it on the upper shelf. It was only a few inches away from the position in the photograph, but it was definitely not where I left it. The piece of tape looked undisturbed, and the box lid was still sealed. My chest felt tight, and my hands began to shake a bit. I checked the rest of my apartment. No windows were open. My front door was locked from the inside. The chain was still in place. I had no explanation. I called a friend to talk about it. He lives in another city, so he couldn't just come over. I explained what was happening in a rushed, breathless way. He asked if I was under stress, or if I'd been sleeping poorly. He wondered if I might be moving the box in my sleep. I almost laughed at that, but I couldn't dismiss the idea completely. Still, I've never sleepwalked in my life. I told him I'd set up a real camera. Maybe I'd use my old laptop to record the closet overnight. He said it sounded like a good plan, and that it might help me see what was going on. After I hung up, I felt a small sense of relief. At least I had something to try. That evening, I positioned my laptop on a chair facing the closet. I turned on the video recording and made sure the closet door was slightly open, so the camera could see inside. Then I checked the battery and plugged in the laptop charger. I tested the angle. I could see the shelves and the tie rack clearly. I also placed a small lamp on the dresser behind the chair, so there'd be enough light to catch any movement. After that, I prepared for bed. I felt tense and a little foolish, but I wanted answers. I left the closet door open about an inch. Then I lay down, trying to relax. But my mind kept racing. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a faint creaking sound. I sat up and listened. I didn't hear anything else. My heart was pounding, and I realized I was sweating. I got up and walked to the living room. Everything was dark and quiet. I checked the front door again, which was locked. I looked at the laptop and saw that it was still recording. The screen was dim, but I could see the little light indicating it was on. I decided not to mess with it and went back to bed. I had trouble falling asleep again, so I just lay there staring at the ceiling. When morning came, I rushed to the laptop before even looking at the closet. The battery was fine. The recording was still going. I stopped the recording and saved the file. Then I turned to the closet. The door was slightly open, and the box of photos was again somewhere it shouldn't be. This time, it was sitting on the floor of the closet in the corner. I reached for it, my hand shaking. I set it aside and tried to calm down. Then I opened the video file. It was long, over 6 hours of footage. I fast-forwarded through it, looking for any obvious movement. As I scrubbed through the recording, I noticed that the closet door shifted at one point. It looked like it moved a couple of inches, but it was hard to see. I slowed the playback. The door seemed to open a bit more. Then it jerked as if something had nudged it. I couldn't see a hand or person or any shape at all. The box of photos, which was on the shelf, started to tilt. It didn't just fall off, it moved slowly as if someone were dragging it. But there was no visible rope or wire. The camera quality wasn't great, but I could see the box slide off the shelf and then drop gently to the floor. It didn't land hard. It almost looked like it had been placed. Then the closet door swung back a bit and everything was still. I paused the video and felt my throat tighten. I rewound it and watched again. The motion was too smooth to be a random fall. There was a distinct jerk, then a slow shift. There was no figure or shadow. I couldn't explain it. My skin tingled and my hands got sweaty. I felt like I had just confirmed something I didn't want to believe. I scanned the rest of the footage, but nothing else happened. After the box settled on the floor, the closet door moved a little, but that was all. I couldn't see any reason for this to happen. I felt a heavy sense of dread. I didn't know if I wanted to keep staying here. But this is my place, and I don't have anywhere else lined up. I got up and walked around the room, trying to think. The wood floors creaked under my feet and the radiator hissed in the corner. I felt like the walls were closing in on me. I told myself to focus on immediate steps. Maybe I could get a specialist to check the closet, someone who knows about old buildings or shifting foundations. But that movement didn't look like simple gravity or slanted floors. I considered calling the police, but there was no sign of forced entry. What would I even tell them? That I have a moving box in my closet? It made no sense. My friend's suggestion about stress and sleep issues came back to me. But the video didn't lie. Unless I had staged it myself and forgotten everything, that idea made me feel even more uncomfortable. I shut the laptop and decided to take a walk. I grabbed my keys, locked the door, and headed outside. The cold air hit me, and I realized I was breathing fast. I walked around my block trying to clear my head. I noticed the sounds of cars passing by and the chatter of people on their morning routines. Everything felt normal out here. I thought about telling my neighbor across the hall, but we're not that close. I wasn't sure how to explain this. After a few minutes, I headed back upstairs. My heart pounded as I unlocked my door. I stepped inside and stood there, listening. It was silent. I walked to the closet. The box was still on the floor in the corner. I stared at it, unsure what to do next. That night, I tried sleeping in the living room. I put the box of photos on the coffee table. I wanted to see if it would stay there. I locked the bedroom closet. Then I set up the laptop to record the living room. The entire apartment felt tense. It was as if the walls were straining to keep still. Every noise made me flinch, but nothing moved in the night. The next morning, the box was still on the table. The living room footage didn't show anything unusual. It's still here, and the closet still bothers me. Whenever I leave the box in the closet overnight, it ends up somewhere else the next morning. When I move the box out of there, nothing happens. I've considered getting rid of it, but I can't bring myself to do it. Those photos mean something to me, even if I rarely look at them. At this point, I feel stuck. I have no explanation. I have the video that shows something impossible happening. I watch it sometimes, hoping they'll see a clue I missed. There's nothing, it just moves. I check the closet door a few times every night. I keep it locked sometimes, but that doesn't always stop the box from shifting. I've tested it. I put the box inside, lock the door, and by morning it's somewhere else in the closet. There's no damage to the lock. I stopped trying to make sense of it. Now I just try to handle it. The tension hasn't gone away, but I'm learning to live with it. It feels wrong, but I have no other choice right now. This is my home. Something's going on in the house. Something's going on in that closet, and I can't explain it, but I face it every day. That box is mine, and it has a habit of moving wherever it wants, whether I understand it or not. I woke up one morning and saw my bedroom window standing wide open. That window almost never opens because it faces a narrow, dark gap between my building and the next one. I keep it shut because I get almost no light from there. Seeing it open like that made my heart pound. I didn't hear anything in the night. I didn't get up to open it. I didn't sleepwalk, but the internal latch was undone, as if someone had turned it. That was the moment I started feeling uncomfortable in my own apartment. The window is about 1.5 feet wide, maybe 2 feet tall. There's only a thin ledge outside, and then a concrete wall that's maybe 3 feet away. That gap is so narrow that even a cat would have trouble jumping around in there. It always smells stale. I keep the window locked. I used to leave it alone most of the time, but I open it about once every couple of months if the room feels stuffy. When that's done, I lock it again. The lock is a small twist latch on the inside frame. It's not advanced, it's just a basic latch, but you have to turn it a full 180 degrees to unlock it. When I saw the latch turned, I stood there in my underwear, rubbing my eyes and wanting to figure out how it could have happened by itself. I checked the latch. It's not that loose, you need to apply some pressure to move it. The wind wouldn't do that. Then I thought maybe I just forgot, but I knew I didn't open the window. It was early, and I had to go to work, so I locked it again, double-checked it, then left. I got home that day and felt uneasy. The window was still locked, and nothing else looked off. I made dinner, watched some TV, and went to bed around midnight. For the next couple of weeks, nothing odd happened. I started to think it was a one-time thing, maybe my own mistake. But then, around 2 weeks later, it happened again. I woke up because I felt a draft on my face, which is unusual in my bedroom. I sat up and realized the window was open a crack, letting in a weak breeze from that dark gap outside. I jumped out of bed and flicked on the light. The latch was turned again, just like before. I felt a chill run down my arms. I kept looking around the room, checking behind the door in my closet, under the bed. Everything was normal except for the window. I shut it and locked it. Then I stood there for a moment, listening. The air in the room felt heavier than normal. I walked over to my front door to see if it was still locked. It was. I checked the chain lock. That was fine. I looked in the kitchen. There was no sign of forced entry. Nothing was missing. I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep well. My stomach felt tight, and I got up a few times to check the window again. It stayed shut that night. The next morning, I decided to get a cheap extra lock from the hardware store down the block. It was a small sliding bolt that I could screw into the window frame. I installed it carefully and tested it a few times. It made the window even harder to open because now you'd have to turn the latch and slide the bolt. I felt better after doing that. I had dinner, watched a movie, and slept through the night with no issues. Around 3 nights later, I woke up to a faint clicking noise. I couldn't tell if it was coming from inside my room or outside in that narrow space. My heart was beating fast as soon as I heard it. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, turned on its flashlight, and aimed it at the window. It was shut. I stood there, watching the lock. I didn't see it move. I listened for another minute, holding my breath. I didn't hear the clicking anymore, so I went back to bed. I kept my phone in my hand for a while, staring at the ceiling. Eventually I drifted off. The next few days were quiet. The window stayed shut. I checked the locks every morning and every evening, but then about a week after I installed the extra lock, something else happened. One morning I woke up to see that the sliding bolt was on the floor. The small screws that held it in place were lying around, and the bolt had popped right off the frame. The window was open about an inch, and the original latch was undone too. I looked at the bolt in my hand. It wasn't broken. The screws were still intact. It looked like someone took a screwdriver and removed them, but that made no sense. I live alone and I keep my door locked. I would have heard something if a person walked in with tools. I felt a wave of panic in my chest. My hands shook as I picked up the pieces. I closed the window, turned the latch, and tried to breathe evenly. I thought about calling the landlord. But what would I say? That my window keeps opening itself? That didn't sound right. He would probably think I was messing with him, or that I was too careless to install a simple lock. I decided to fix it myself. I went to the toolbox in the kitchen and found longer screws. I reinstalled the bolt, this time pressing hard into the wood. The frame felt solid. After I finished, I shoved a heavy dresser in front of the window. It was a bit of work to move it, and I had to push it carefully to avoid scraping the floor. I lined it up so that it blocked the window completely. You couldn't reach the window latch without moving the dresser away. That night, I lay in bed staring at the dresser. I kept the lights off because I didn't want to freak myself out more. I listened. My building is old, so it always has a few noises. Pipes clicking, floors creaking, neighbors talking, refrigerators humming. But I kept my ears open for anything unusual. I might have dozed off for about an hour. Then I heard a dull thump. I shot up in bed, feeling my heart race. It sounded like something bumped the dresser. I didn't hear any footsteps or breathing. I waited a few seconds. Then I got up and turned on the light. The dresser looked the same, but I noticed it wasn't completely flush with the wall anymore. There was maybe half an inch of space that wasn't there before. It felt like something pushed it. I was shaking. I gripped the top of the dresser and tried to see if it moved easily. It was heavy. I needed real effort to shift it. I tried to reassure myself that maybe the dresser just settled into a different position on the floor, or maybe I had left it at a slight angle. I spent the rest of that night tossing and turning, having strange dreams about hearing scratching behind the dresser. Every time I woke up, I checked the position of the dresser. It didn't move again. In the morning, I got up, pulled the dresser back, and saw that the window was still locked, the bolt was still in place, and the latch was turned to locked. I felt a bit of relief. At least it wasn't open again. I tried to go about my day getting dressed, eating some cereal, and leaving for work. But I kept thinking about the dresser while I was at the office. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off in my bedroom. That evening I came home early. As soon as I walked in, I checked the window. It was locked, and the dresser was still against the wall. And everything was calm. For the next few days, things stayed that way. No new noises, no signs of movement. Then, late one night, around 2 a.m., I woke up with a strong urge to check the window again. I had that anxious feeling in my chest again, like something was wrong. I got out of bed quietly, approached the dresser, and felt a slight vibration, almost like a faint tremor. I leaned in, pressing my ear to the top of the dresser. I couldn't hear much, but I felt a barely noticeable movement through the wood. My skin prickled. I pulled the dresser away from the wall just enough to shine a flashlight behind it. The window latch was undone. The bolt lay on the windowsill intact. The window was open about half an inch. The lock had been removed again without any sign of damage. The small screws were neatly placed next to the bolt, as if someone had set them down gently. My heart pounded in my ears. The hair on my arms stood up. I felt my breaths coming in quick bursts. I almost dropped my phone. I kept expecting someone to jump out from the dark corner behind the dresser, but there was no space for anyone to hide there. I slammed the window shut, locked the latch, and tried to reinstall the bolt in a hurry. My fingers were shaking, and sweat dripped down my forehead. I had trouble lining up the screws. I managed to get 2 of them in, just enough to hold the bolt again. Then I shoved the dresser back against it. I felt lightheaded and my mouth was dry. There was a taste of metal in my throat from how nervous I was. I grabbed a glass of water from the kitchen and sat on my couch for a while. I turned on the TV, not because I wanted to watch anything but because I needed noise. I didn't go back to my bedroom for a long time. The idea of sleeping in there made my stomach tense up. When I finally did go back, I left the hall light on. I checked the dresser. It hadn't moved. I decided to try to sleep. My body felt drained, and I wanted at least a few hours of rest before morning. I slid under the covers but couldn't stop thinking about how that bolt ended up on the windowsill. Nobody could fit through that window. It's too small, and the gap outside is too narrow. There's no way anyone could stand there with tools. Also, the building walls are smooth concrete. There's no place to grip or climb. I tried to replay everything in my head. Maybe I was missing some detail, but I kept coming up blank. I started hearing tapping sounds from that gap at random times. It wasn't loud. It was more like a soft rapping on the concrete wall outside. Sometimes it happened in the afternoon, sometimes late at night. If I hurried to the window and looked outside, all I saw was the opposite wall. There was no person, no animal. The tapping stopped as soon as I opened the window. I would stand there, leaning out a bit, not smelling anything except musty air. I could see the drip of some old pipe, maybe from the apartment above or next door, but there was nothing else. I thought about sealing the window shut with silicone or nails. I worried that if something was forcing it open, that might escalate things. I felt silly thinking that way, but I couldn't help it. The tension was getting to me. My neck felt stiff, and I was clenching my jaw in my sleep. Every time I heard a noise, my whole body tensed. I dreaded going to bed. I dreaded waking up to see the window open again. A few times I dreamed about the latch turning by itself. I would wake up in a cold sweat, and my heart would race. After a couple of weeks of that, I tried a new strategy. I pushed a heavy bookshelf in front of the dresser, so now there was a big barricade of furniture. It made my bedroom crowded. I had to shuffle sideways to get around the bed, but I felt a bit safer seeing all that weight in front of the window. I tested it by trying to push the dresser with my hip. It barely moved. I thought there was no way it could shift on its own now. For about 5 nights, nothing happened. I slept more, even though I kept waking up to check the window around 3 a.m. each night. On the 6th night, I woke up to a strange scraping noise. It sounded like wood against wood. I shot up in bed and grabbed my phone for the flashlight. The bookshelf was at an angle. The side closest to the wall had been pushed forward an inch or two, and it jammed against the bed frame. I saw deep scratches on the floor where the bookshelf used to be. I felt my stomach twist. I got up and tried to push the bookshelf back. It didn't move easily, like it was stuck on the floor. I had to wiggle it a bit. When I finally moved it, the dresser was also shifted. The window was open a few inches, the latch undone. The bolt was on the floor again, along with the screws. They were perfectly lined up in a neat row. I stared at them. My throat felt tight. I picked them up one by one and turned them over in my hand. They looked normal, with no signs of force. It was like someone had carefully removed them and placed them there. Then I took a breath and reached for the window. I shut it, locked it, and reinstalled the bolt. My hand was shaking so badly that I dropped a screw. I had to crouch down and feel around on the floor until I found it. After I was done, I stood still, listening. The apartment was silent except for my own breathing. My shirt felt soaked at the armpits, and my legs felt weak. I haven't told any neighbors about this. I'm worried they'll think I'm making it up or that I'm paranoid. But I know something strange is happening in that gap. Something keeps wanting that window open. I can see any sign of an intruder. I've never found footprints or marks on the windowsill. I've never found tools or pieces of clothing. It's like the lock just vanishes for a moment and then reappears undone. Lately, I've thought about moving out. My lease is almost up, and I don't feel safe here. I've considered drilling the window frame shut, but I'm afraid that might make things worse. Sometimes I feel like the tension in the room is so thick that I can't breathe right. My pulse speeds up every time I look at that window. I keep blocking it with furniture, but every time something manages to push past or remove the lock, I double-check the door at night. I wedge a chair under the doorknob. I try to reassure myself that I'm alone, but it doesn't help. The window is currently shut. I have the dresser and bookshelf in place again. I install 2 more slide bolts with longer screws. one at the top of the frame and one at the bottom. I keep my phone charged and a flashlight by the bed. Every morning as soon as I wake up, I check the window. I haven't heard new noises for a couple of days, but I know it's not over. I can't stop thinking about what might happen next. I keep feeling a slight draft on my neck when I lie in bed, and I'm unsure if it's real or just my imagination. That's everything that's happened so far. I don't have a solution. I don't even have an explanation. I just know that window won't stay closed no matter what I do. Something is forcing it open. Something wants access to that dark gap, and I don't know how to make it stop. I don't care if people think I'm losing my mind. I've lived in this apartment for a while, and nothing ever felt this unsettling before. I can't ignore it anymore. I'm thinking about packing my stuff and leaving the second my lease ends. If that window opens again tonight, I might even leave sooner. I'm not sure how much more of this I can take. I never thought I would question my own senses, but these last few weeks have changed that. I used to feel calm when I walked on that forest trail. Now I watch my every step and keep looking over my shoulder. Something's not right out there, and I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I'm a grown man with no history of seeing strange things, yet I can't deny the events that keep happening. I'm a man of my own, and I can't deny what keeps happening. I usually head to the trail around 5 or 6 in the evening. There's a little parking area at the edge of the reserve, and from there it's a short walk through a small clearing until I reach the tree line. The place has always been quiet. Sometimes I see a few squirrels or rabbits. Sometimes I spot a lone hiker or a couple out for a stroll. In general, the trail is empty. 3 weeks ago, I noticed the first odd occurrence. It was getting dark, but the sun was still visible through the branches. I was walking at my usual pace, not rushing, with my sneakers crunching the dirt and loose gravel underfoot. I heard the wind rustling the leaves, and I felt the dry summer air on my face. Everything seemed normal. Then, just out of the corner of my eye, I caught a shape moving between 2 thick trees. It was a dark shape, but I couldn't see any details. I jerked my head in that direction, but all I saw were trunks and branches. I assumed it might have been a trick of the light, so I continued my walk. A few minutes later, I thought I saw something again, this time on my left side. I stopped in my tracks. The forest was silent for a moment. Scanned the area, but I saw nothing except leaves, bark, and scattered logs. I told myself it was just my imagination. I was tired. I had worked a long shift that day, so I shrugged it off and finished my route. I didn't feel too unsettled then. I chalked it up to fatigue. A couple of days later, I returned at roughly the same time. I try to keep a routine so I don't miss out on my exercise. The trail was cool, and I felt a slight breeze against my arms. It was all very relaxing until I noticed the same strange shapes. They were flickers in my peripheral vision. I can only describe them as tall, dark patches of movement that faded the instant I looked at them. My heart rate jumped a bit, and I felt sweat forming on my forehead. I stopped again, took a deep breath, and looked around for any person or animal that might have caused those movements. Nothing. No footsteps. No rustling other than the wind in the leaves. I told myself to keep walking. I didn't want to overthink it. But for the rest of that walk, I felt tense. My shoulders were stiff. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. I kept glancing back, sure I would catch something or someone. Each time I turned, the trail behind me was empty. When I got home, I felt a surge of relief as I opened my front door. I dropped my backpack on the floor and stood in the doorway for a few seconds. Trying to calm down, my pulse was still high. On my next walk, I tried going a little earlier, around 4 o'clock. I thought if I avoided the lower light of dusk, I could avoid any confusion caused by shadows or tired eyes. The trail looked the same as always. Leaves a mix of greens with some browns, dirt under my feet feeling familiar. I took the same path. About halfway through, I started getting that uneasy feeling. I felt like I was being followed. It wasn't just a passing thought. It was a steady sense that someone was right behind me. But when I turned around, the path was empty. There weren't even footprints that matched someone else's shoes. I checked, but it was just my Tarks. I decided to test myself. I stood still for a moment and listened. My breathing was a bit fast, so I tried to calm it. Once it was quiet, I heard a faint rustle. Once it was quiet again, I heard a faint rustle behind a cluster of bushes. I waited, hoping a squirrel or a stray cat would pop out. Nothing did. Then I heard 1 or 2 small crunches. like someone stepping on dried leaves. I whipped my head toward the sound. No movement, no silhouette, nothing. That was enough for me that day. I turned around and headed back to my car, trying to act calm but failing. My palms were sweaty on the steering wheel all the way home. When I told a friend about these experiences, he shrugged and said maybe I was spooking myself for no reason. He teased that I was letting my imagination run wild. I thought he might be right, but I couldn't ignore how real it felt at the moment. I decided to change my schedule. Instead of late afternoon or evening, I tried going in the morning. I arrived at the trail around night. The sun was higher, and the lighting was bright. I walked through the forest, taking in the view without any weird sensations for the first 10 minutes. Then I noticed something black in the distance on the right side of the path. It moved away behind a line of tall pines the second my eyes registered it. My breath caught in my throat. I stopped. My heart felt like it skipped a beat. I stared at those pines, waiting for someone to emerge. Nobody came out. I walked in that direction, staying alert and checking the ground for footprints or any sign of life. Nothing. The dirt looked undisturbed except for my own tracks. I listened for footsteps, twigs snapping. Anything. The forest was quiet. I couldn't hear any birds or squirrels scurrying around. The air felt heavy, and my body tensed up again. I kept going forward because I didn't want to run away without finishing my walk. Part of me felt stubborn about it. Maybe I was letting my nerves get the best of me. I walked for another 5 minutes, hearing only my own breathing and the steady thump of my footsteps. Then I smelled something. A faint odor of damp earth mixed with a sour note I couldn't identify. It reminded me of wet clothes left out for too long. I scanned the area. The smell was coming from somewhere off trail, but I couldn't see any source. I heard a snap, like a branch breaking underfoot. My pulse skyrocketed, and my mouth went dry. I took a few steps backward, watching the trees. Nothing happened. I waited for a minute or two. Then I turned around and headed back the way I came. I felt goosebumps on my arms despite the warm sun. I held my phone in my hand, ready to call someone if I saw anything more threatening. That evening I couldn't relax. Every time I tried to picture the forest, I felt uneasy. My mind went over every detail. It kept showing me that dark shape slipping behind the pines. It was tall and seemed human, but I couldn't be sure. I wanted to be logical about it. Could it be a regular person wearing dark clothes, maybe hiding or messing with me? Yeah, I considered that possibility, but I never heard a voice or saw footprints. I also never heard any conversation or the usual noises people make. A few days later, I decided to give the trail one more chance. I don't like leaving things unresolved. I arrived in the late afternoon again, close to 5 o'clock, hoping to face whatever was happening. The parking lot was empty. My legs felt tight and my stomach was in knots. I kept telling myself to keep cool, but I was already sweating a bit before I started. I walked into the forest, scanning the sides of the path more than usual. About 10 minutes in, I heard footsteps. This time, they were clear, like boots on gravel. They matched my pace for a few seconds before they stopped. My heart thumped against my chest, and I felt a rush of adrenaline. I spun around, arms tensed. No one was there. I tried calling out, "Hey, is someone there?" My voice sounded shaky. I waited, but there was no answer. I took a few more steps and heard the same crunching sound. It was behind me again, maybe 10 or 20 feet away. I whipped around in time to see a flicker of movement. It disappeared behind a thick trunk. I felt a surge of panic, and my breathing got shallow. I glanced down the path, trying to decide whether to run or confront it. The footsteps started again, slow and heavy. Then they stopped. I took a single step back, eyes locked on that trunk. Nothing moved. My mind was racing. I thought about walking closer to that tree, but my instincts told me not to. My muscles were tense, and my fingers tingled. I turned away and began walking fast toward the trail exit. I heard footsteps for a few seconds behind me. Then they faded. I didn't look back. I just walked as quickly as I could without outright sprinting. By the time I reached the car, I was out of breath, and my shirt was damp with sweat. When I got home, I locked my door and dropped onto my couch. I rubbed my face with both hands, trying to process what I had experienced. Everything about those footsteps felt real. I knew I wasn't just imagining them. There was no reason for me to hallucinate or trick myself like that. My stress level was through the roof, and my body ached with tension. Over the next few days, I kept thinking about returning to the trail, but my gut told me not to. My friend suggested I find another place to hike, maybe a more popular spot with more people around. I agreed that might be safer or at least less unsettling. But part of me doesn't want to give up. I still feel drawn to that trail. It's peaceful if I ignore the shadows and strange sounds. Yet every time I picture going back, my chest tightens. Last week I tried one final time. I chose noon on a Sunday, thinking there might be more people out enjoying the day. I pulled into the parking area and saw no other cars. That did not make me feel better. I stepped onto the trail, listening for signs of other hikers. I heard only my own movements. I walked a quarter mile in, glancing around every few seconds. Nothing strange happened at first. I started feeling hopeful. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe it was just random illusions before. Then I noticed the trees looking darker in one section. I stopped to focus on it. As I stared, I saw a shape slip behind a trunk. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. My breaths got shallow, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my neck. I took a step toward the tree. Then I hesitated. My muscles felt locked. I heard a low crunch, as if someone moved slightly. I felt a chill spread across my skin. Without thinking, I turned around and walked back to my car at a brisk pace. My ears were on high alert, but I only heard my own steps and the occasional rustle of leaves. I reached my car, yanked the door open, and got inside. My hands were trembling as I started the engine. I drove away, checking my rearview mirror for any sign of movement behind me. Ever since that day, I haven't gone back to that trail. Instead, I spend my free time at a gym or on different paths closer to town. I haven't seen any strange shadows in those places and don't feel paranoid when I walk there. Still, the memory of those footsteps and dark shapes lingers in my mind. I can't make sense of it. I can't explain it. All I know is that something was out there, and it seemed to watch me. I never heard a voice, never found footprints, never saw a face, but I felt it. I'm still not sure what to believe. Every time I think about returning, my heart starts racing. I don't have any evidence to show anyone. No pictures, no recordings. It's just me and my experiences. That trail, once a peaceful spot, has become a place I associate with tension and confusion. I'm not ready to dismiss it as a figment of my imagination, but I also can't prove anything was really there. Maybe someday I'll find the courage to go back and see if anything has changed. Right now, though, I'm choosing not to push my luck. I'd rather keep my distance. I still drive by the reserve sometimes, and my eyes flick to that tree line. It looks calm from the outside, but I remember the shapes, footsteps, and that heavy feeling of being watched. That memory is enough to keep me away, at least for now. I've lived in this building for 3 years, and most days I don't think about the little balcony on the 3rd floor. It's a communal space that nobody uses. There's no lawn chair set, no table, no plants. There's just this old rocking chair against the wall. I never saw anyone sit in it. Whenever I walked by, I'd just glance at it and then move on. But one night I heard an odd sound coming from that balcony. A slow creaking noise that reminded me of a loose door hinge. It kept going at a steady rhythm and then stopped. The next morning, I saw that the rocking chair had been dragged a few feet. It faced the glass door as if someone had been watching the hallway from outside. That was the moment I realized I couldn't ignore it anymore.
I live on the 2nd floor, but there are only 3 floors here.
There aren't many people in the building. I know Linda and Carlos from the 1st floor, and there's an older couple on the 3rd floor who barely leave their apartment. A young couple also lives on the 2nd floor, but we don't chat much beyond the usual greetings. When I first noticed that the chair had moved, I asked all of them about it. Carlos said he had no idea it existed. Linda swore she'd never heard or seen anyone out there. The older couple just shrugged. The young couple told me they hadn't gone near it. Everyone acted like the chair was just some piece of junk that belonged to nobody. During the day, the balcony is bright from the sunlight. The walls are a dull white. The floor is made of gray concrete. There's a wooden railing with chipped paint that wraps around it. On most days, I see dust and leaves collecting in the corners. The chair is right against the wall next to the door leading out. It's old, its wooden frame is scuffed, and a bit of the seat is torn. One of the legs has a crack in it. The backrest is curved, and the arms are round and smooth in some places, rough in others. It looks like something from decades ago left outside to rot, but it stays in one piece. I first noticed the chair shifting positions about a month ago. I usually get home around 7
I drop my keys on the kitchen counter, grab a quick dinner, then settle into my living room. Sometimes I watch TV, sometimes I do some reading. Around midnight, I start preparing for bed. One night, while I was brushing my teeth, I heard this dull squeak. It was faint, but it kept happening at a steady pace. I turned off the faucet and listened. The sound came from upstairs. I opened my apartment door and walked quietly to the stairwell. The sound got clearer as I climbed the steps. It was definitely a rocking motion. I reached the third-floor landing and stood next to the door to the balcony. The noise continued. It was a slow back-and-forth squeak. After a few seconds, it stopped. I twisted the knob and stepped outside. The night air was cool. The sky was clear, with no wind. The chair was still. It faced the wall. I stared at it for a moment, felt a slight chill on my neck, then went back to my apartment. The following morning, I left for work around 8. My commute is short, just a quick bus ride. When I passed by the balcony door, I glanced outside. The chair was about 3 feet away from where it had been the night before. It faced the glass. I didn't think anyone else had gone out there that morning. I felt a spike of unease in my chest. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself someone must have moved it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was odd how nobody claimed it. Nobody joked about it. Nobody admitted to touching it. At first I tried to ignore the situation. I kept to my normal routine. 2 weeks passed without me paying much attention to the balcony. But one night around 2:00 a.m., I heard the squeaking again. It sounded a bit louder. I jumped out of bed, walked into my living room and listened through the window that faces the courtyard. The noise seemed to echo, but it was faint. I pulled on some jeans and a jacket, went to my front door and climbed the stairs as quietly as possible. When I reached the top, the squeaking kept going for a few more seconds, then stopped abruptly. I held my breath and opened the balcony door. The chair was about 5 feet from the wall this time. It faced slightly to the right as if angled to look toward my building's hallway door. I felt my stomach tighten. I stared at the chair, waiting for it to move. It didn't. I waited maybe a minute, but it felt longer. I was aware of my heart pounding. The night air felt colder than before. After a while, I backed away and went back downstairs. I couldn't sleep well that night. A few days later, I asked Linda if she'd noticed anything strange at night. She said she never heard anything. She joked that maybe we had a ghost, and I laughed along with her. But my nerves were shot. After that conversation, I kept glancing at the balcony door whenever I passed by. The chair stayed where it was for 2 whole days. It didn't move, and I didn't hear any squeaking. Then on the third night I was up late reading. It was close to 1 a.m., and the building was silent. Suddenly I heard the squeaking again. My body tensed, my hand gripped the edge of the book, and I felt a trickle of sweat at my temple. I stood up, walked to my living room window, and tried to see if there was any light on in the third-floor hallway. It was dark. The squeaking continued, slow but steady. This time, I decided to watch from my own floor. I went into the corridor, then to the second-floor landing, where I could look up through the stairwell. The sound was definitely coming from the balcony area. I saw nothing moving in the hallway. After about 30 seconds, it stopped. The next morning, I found the chair angled toward the door again. It had a slight tilt, like it was off balance, and the seat had a faint dent, as if someone had just been there. The wood smelled slightly musty, but there was another odor too, like old tobacco smoke. I don't smoke, and neither do any of my neighbors as far as I know. An uncomfortable pressure settled in my chest. I kept thinking about how I'd never seen any sign of who might be using the chair at night. I decided to stay up late on purpose one weekend. I wanted to catch whoever was doing this. I set up a small folding chair in my apartment's hallway, right behind the door to my unit so I could peek out. I shut off the lights inside and waited there with the door cracked open just enough to look into the corridor. I had a clear view of the stairs. I read a magazine under the dim light of a small flashlight. It felt like hours. Around 2 a.m., I heard the squeak. I tensed up, my hands shaking a little and my breathing growing shallow. I waited, listening carefully. The sound continued for a full minute. Nobody came up or down the stairs. Nobody entered or left the third-floor hallway. The squeaking stopped. I waited a few more minutes, then crept upstairs. I turned the doorknob to the balcony as quietly as I could and peered through the crack. The rocking chair shifted once or twice, then went still. I saw it move with my own eyes, but there was no breeze. There was no one there. A jolt of adrenaline coursed through me. The hair on my arm stood up. My throat went dry. My hands were clammy. The chair stopped moving. I shut the door and went back to my apartment without making a sound. After that night, I found myself feeling nervous every time I passed the balcony door. The mere sight of that old wooden chair made my stomach twist. Sometimes I avoided even looking in that direction. One morning I went to take out the trash, and I felt a weird chill in the air. I glanced at the door, saw the chair in the middle of the balcony again, and felt a tightening in my chest. I didn't even bother trying to move it back. I wasn't sure what I'd do if I touched it. It sounds stupid, but I felt like it might shift under my hand. That idea made my skin crawl. One afternoon, Carlos caught me in the hallway. He asked me if I knew who kept leaving the balcony door propped open during the night. I told him I had no clue. He said he sometimes found it open early in the morning, even though he was sure it had been shut the evening before. I asked if he'd heard any noises or if he'd seen anything unusual. He just shook his head. He seemed uncomfortable. He asked me if I noticed anything strange going on, and I played dumb. I pretended I had no idea what he was talking about. I wasn't ready to talk about the chair with him. I didn't want to sound unhinged. Over the next week, I heard the squeaking noise 4 nights in a row. Each time, it started around 1 or 2 a.m. and lasted no more than a minute. It always stopped the moment I decided to investigate. I thought about setting up a camera, but I felt silly about the whole thing. Part of me just wanted to pretend it wasn't happening. Another part of me wanted to see proof, but I was scared of what I might capture. The tension built up each night. I found myself lying in bed, anticipating the noise. As the clock neared midnight, my jaw would clench and my muscles would ache from staying so tense. I kept the curtains shut. I didn't feel safe looking outside. One evening, around 11 p.m., I went up to the balcony with a small flashlight. I wanted to see if there was anything around that chair I hadn't noticed before. The air was still warm from the day's heat, and the hallway lights were off. I stepped onto the concrete floor of the balcony and approached the chair. It looked the same as always. Old, cracked, and a bit filthy. I reached down and touched the seat. The wood felt rough. The tear in the cushion had frayed edges, and there was a musty odor. I sniffed the armrest. That old tobacco smell was still there. I knelt down and shone my flashlight on the floor. Underneath, I saw dust, a few dead bugs, and some scraps of leaf debris. There were no footprints, no weird stains. Nothing explained anything. Even though it was warm outside, I felt goosebumps on my arms. I tried rocking the chair. It made the same slow squeak I'd heard at night. I stood up and moved behind it, checking the backrest. There were faint scratches like someone had run their nails along the wood. I didn't see any names or symbols, just random marks. I didn't find any hidden compartments or anything that might suggest a prank. The longer I stayed out there, the more uneasy I felt. My hands started trembling. My legs felt weak. I got that sense of being watched, even though I was alone. I backed away, turned off my flashlight, and went inside. I locked my apartment door, feeling a rush of relief once I was safe inside. That same night, I decided to stay awake until I heard the noise. Around 1:30 a.m., it started. My stomach knotted up. My heart pounded. I waited about 10 seconds, then moved to my living room window. I pulled the curtain aside, just a tiny bit. I could see the 3rd floor balcony if I angled myself just right, but only part of it. I stared through the opening. The squeak stopped. I noticed a slight motion in the shadowy corner. Then it went still. The chair had moved toward the balcony railing. There was no one there. I couldn't sleep. After that, I sat in my living room until dawn, thinking about what I saw. My mind kept racing. I knew the building was locked at night. I knew there wasn't anyone from the outside coming in. I had no reason to suspect any neighbor. Nobody had a key to the balcony door besides the people who live here, and none of them admitted using the space. I started to wonder if I should call someone or get rid of the chair, but it wasn't mine. I wasn't sure if that would cause trouble. Also, I felt this irrational hesitation, like if I took it upon myself to remove the chair, I might be inviting more problems. So I did nothing. That brings me to last night. I was restless again. I was lying in bed, eyes shut, but I couldn't drift off to sleep. I heard the squeaking. My heart thumped in my chest. My breathing got faster. I rolled onto my side and stayed there. The squeaking went on for maybe 15 seconds. Then I heard a soft scrape, like the chair was being dragged along the concrete floor. My skin prickled with goose flesh. My arms felt cold. I got up, went to my living room, and stood by the door. I felt scared to open it. I just stared at the doorknob, listening intently. Everything went quiet. I didn't open the door or investigate further. I just waited, feeling my pulse in my throat. Eventually, I went back to bed. I tried to sleep, but it was fitful and restless. This morning on my way out, I looked toward the balcony again. The chair sat in the center, angled directly at the glass door. It looked like it was waiting for something. I hesitated for a few seconds. My chest felt tight with anxiety. I opened the door just to see if anything would happen. It stayed still. It was just a beat-up wooden rocking chair, silent and motionless. Nothing happened. I breathed out slowly, shut the door, and left for work. But the memory of that squeaking sound and the sight of the chair in that position stayed with me all day. I don't have an explanation for this phenomenon. No one else in the building takes it seriously. I keep hoping someone will knock on my door and say they've been messing with me, but nobody does. Each time I walk past that balcony door, I get a shiver in my spine. I start sweating. My heart speeds up. I can't help thinking about what I saw. The chair swayed on its own with no wind present. I heard the noise. I've seen it move positions, and I don't know who or what is causing it. I just feel uneasy whenever I'm near that spot. So I've considered packing up and moving out, but that's expensive and complicated. For now, I stay. Every time I climb the stairs, I look at that door. I take a deep breath before I pass by. Sometimes I think I hear a faint creak or squeak from behind the glass. I don't stop to investigate anymore. I just keep walking, but I can feel a chill running down my back, and I know that chair is still there, waiting in the corner, ready to shift again when darkness falls. I realized something was off the first time I saw the painting in my living room. At first I didn't notice it. I was busy stacking boxes, sorting through my friend's old belongings, and trying to figure out where to store everything she had left behind. But when I finally looked at that oil painting, I felt my heart pound. I saw a dark landscape with an overcast sky and a twisted tree in the foreground. It wasn't a pretty scene, it looked cold and empty. Something about the colors made me tense. My friend Julia moved overseas for a job opportunity, and she didn't want to take all her stuff. She left me some furniture, a few boxes of clothes, some books, and this painting. She said she got it from an art student a few years ago. I shrugged when I first saw it. It wasn't my style. I'm not into gloomy landscapes, but she asked me to keep it, so I did. I propped it against the wall in my living room. I planned to hang it up eventually because she told me it meant something to her. She had mentioned how the artist was local and maybe it had some sentimental value. I figured I could honor her request. Plus, I felt lazy about putting it away in the closet. It was easier just to leave it against the wall for the time being. I kept going through her boxes. Most were clothes, some old novels, a pair of sneakers in decent shape. That was my day, sorting, folding, stacking. The painting stayed in the corner, not attracting much attention. I only noticed that from some angles, the sky in the painting seemed more gray than blue. I thought maybe it was the light from the window playing tricks on my eyes. Over the next few days, I started feeling uncomfortable every time I passed by the living room. I couldn't put my finger on it. The painting seemed to get my attention even when I tried to ignore it. I'd walk by in the morning and glance at it. Then I'd pause because I felt something wasn't the same. The tree looked taller, or the trunk had a different shape, or the clouds had shifted. But when I looked again, it seemed normal. I started telling myself I was imagining things. I decided to take a photo with my phone. I took a few pictures from different angles just to confirm whether anything was changing. The photos looked identical to each other. Nothing moved. Nothing was out of place. The tree had the same number of branches every time. The sky was the same dull gray. The small patch of grass in front was the same muddy green. Still, when I looked at the painting in person, I felt certain something was different. It made me uneasy. By the end of the first week, I noticed the painting seemed darker overall. It was as if the colors were shifting toward deeper shades. The grass seemed browner. The sky seemed almost black in the corners. Even the twisted tree looked thicker. I tried to compare it to the photos again, but they all looked the same as before. I got frustrated. I told myself it was just my mood or maybe the room's lighting had changed. It was summer, and sometimes the sunlight in my apartment shifted throughout the day, but the feeling that the painting was alive started to nag me. I'd walk into the living room at night, and from the corner of my eye, I'd see something move in the painting. I turned my head quickly, but nothing would be moving when I focused on it. My chest would tighten. I'd feel my pulse in my neck, but then I'd shrug it off. I'd watch some TV, eat my dinner, and try to keep things normal. Still, every time I passed that painting, I felt a slight tremor in my stomach. I decided to hang it on the wall, thinking maybe it would look less strange if it was at eye level. I used a hammer and nail, then carefully hung the painting above my couch. I stepped back. The painting looked normal for a second. The twisted tree was on the left side, the sky in the center, and a small patch of grass at the bottom. I felt a bit silly for being paranoid. Later that night, I made dinner in the kitchen. The smell of tomato sauce filled the apartment. I turned on the TV in the living room so I could watch from the kitchen counter while I cooked. Every few minutes, I glanced at the painting. At one point, while stirring the sauce, I paused to look at it. I noticed something that made me drop the spoon. The twisted tree had a new branch sticking out on the right side. I was sure it wasn't there before. My chest felt tight, and my hands started to sweat. I put the spoon down on the counter and walked over. I stood in front of the painting for a full minute, staring. I counted the branches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 main branches, but I remembered 4 from before. I took out my phone and looked at the photo I'd taken. The previous day, the tree had 4 branches in that picture. Now I was seeing 5, but in the photo it looked no different. I zoomed in on the photo, still 4 branches. I looked back at the painting on the wall. I saw 5. My heart raced. I felt a dull ache in my head. I touched my forehead, feeling a slight headache coming on. I ran my finger gently over the surface of the paint. It was smooth and dry. There was no sign of fresh paint. I smelled it, trying to detect paint thinner or oil, but there was no odor. My breathing was shallow. I looked over at the windows. They were closed. A chill crawled up my arms, and I stepped away from the painting. I decided to ignore it again. I finished my dinner, then watched some random show on TV, but my mind kept drifting back to that extra branch. I felt scared, but also a bit annoyed. Was I losing my mind? I tried to distract myself with phone games and random YouTube videos, but it didn't help. Every time I walked back into the living room, the painting caught my eye. I kept seeing 5 branches. I couldn't deny it anymore. That night, I slept with the bedroom door closed. I didn't want to see the painting in the dark. The next morning, I woke up early, feeling groggy but forcing myself to check the painting right away. I turned on the living room light. The painting looked even darker. The ground was almost black, like wet soil, and the sky was a heavy gray with patches that looked like they were turning black. I noticed more small branches on the tree, almost as if it was growing. I stared in silence, holding my phone in my hand. I didn't even bother taking more photos. They never showed the changes. I already knew that. I started feeling a dull pressure in my chest, like mild panic. My thoughts were racing. I wondered if I could contact Julia and ask her about the painting. Maybe she knew something about the artist. I sent her a quick message on social media, asking if she ever noticed the painting changing. I tried to sound casual. She didn't respond right away. She was in a different time zone. I had to leave for work, so I locked my apartment and left the painting behind. At work, I felt distracted. I kept thinking about it. My boss noticed I was unfocused. My coworkers asked if I was okay. I told them I was dealing with some personal stuff. The day dragged on. By the time I got home, it was late. I turned on the living room light and felt my stomach clench. The painting looked even more sinister. The twisted tree stood out more. The shadows on the grass were longer. The sky seemed to blend into the corners of the canvas, like it was swallowing the landscape. My phone buzzed. It was Julia replying to my message. She said she never noticed anything strange, but she didn't pay much attention to it. She got it from a guy in a local art fair. That was all she knew. I felt a wave of disappointment. I wanted an explanation, but there was none. That night, I stayed in the living room with the painting. I turned on every lamp I had, making the room bright. I opened a bottle of beer and sat on the couch, facing the painting. I watched it for what felt like hours. I didn't see it move or shift in real time. But every once in a while, if I looked away and looked back, it seemed different. A branch here, a thicker shadow there. My throat felt dry, and my palms were damp. I wiped them on my jeans. I turned the TV on for background noise, but I kept my eyes on the painting. At some point, I fell asleep on the couch. In the morning, the painting was darker again. I saw new details in the shadows, like faint outlines of something in the background. I couldn't make out if there were more trees or rocks. The overall scene felt heavier. I was tired of feeling afraid, so I decided to do something about it. I tried to remove the painting from the wall, but my hand was shaking as I reached for it. I lifted it off the nail and carried it across the room. It felt heavier in my hands than before, though I didn't know if that was real or just my imagination. I shoved the painting into a big garbage bag. I felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. Part of me wanted to throw it away immediately, but Julia trusted me to take care of it. Also, I felt like it wouldn't be that simple. I worried that if I just threw it away, I'd keep thinking about it. Maybe I'd see it in my dreams or something. Still, I didn't want it in my living room, so I took it down to the storage locker in the basement of my building. My basement is a cold concrete space with overhead lights that flicker. There are rows of metal cages where residents store bikes, boxes, and random items. I unlocked my cage, set the painting against the wall, and locked it away. I exhaled slowly. I went back upstairs and tried to go about my day. The living room felt calmer without the painting on the wall. I vacuumed the floor, did the dishes, and listened to some music. For the next few days, I avoided the basement. Every time I passed the elevator buttons, I felt a small jolt of fear at the thought of going down there. But I told myself the painting was locked away. It couldn't do anything to me if I didn't look at it. I even slept better at night. After a week, I had to get my bike for a quick ride. That meant going to the basement locker. My chest felt tight as I took the elevator down. The doors opened. The hallway smelled damp. The overhead lights buzzed. I walked to my locker. I heard the echo of my own footsteps on the cement floor. I stood in front of the metal gate. My heart pounded. I knew the painting was on the other side of that gate. I grabbed the padlock and hesitated. My hands were shaky. I unlocked it and slid the door open. I saw my bike leaning against the wall. The painting was next to it. Even through the black garbage bag, I could see the outline of the frame. I didn't want to look at it, but I felt compelled. I moved the bike aside. I pulled open the bag just enough to see the canvas.
I felt a surge of nausea when I saw it.
The painting was almost completely black. The twisted tree was still visible, but it was like a silhouette against a dark background. The small grass patch looked more like a black swamp. Everything had merged into this dim shape. I felt my legs weaken. I tried to steady my breathing. My mouth felt dry. I put the bag back over the painting. I locked the cage. Back upstairs in my apartment, I paced around trying to calm down. I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't want the painting in my home, and I didn't want to keep it in the basement. Maybe I could sell it or give it away, but I doubted anyone would want it. Also, I didn't want to pass this strange problem to someone else. I felt trapped. That evening, I got a text from Julia asking how everything was going. I told her about the painting. I described how it got darker, how it seemed to change. She thought I was joking at first, then she apologized for leaving it with me. She suggested I throw it out. She said she didn't mind, so I made up my mind. I would get rid of it. The next day, I woke up early. I went to the basement. I opened the cage, grabbed the painting, and carried it out to my car. I almost dropped it because I felt shaky, but I managed. I drove out of town to a spot near a junkyard. I parked on a side street. My hands were sweaty on the wheel. My breathing was fast. I stepped out, got the painting from the trunk, and looked around. There were a few old dumpsters scattered around. I placed the painting beside the largest dumpster, still wrapped in the bag. My heart was thumping. I turned around and walked back to the car. I didn't look back. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as I drove away. It's been a few weeks since then. I haven't seen the painting again. My apartment feels lighter, and I don't have that nervous feeling when I sit in my living room. I keep expecting to see something else strange happen, but so far, it hasn't. Sometimes I catch myself glancing at the wall where it used to hang, but it's empty now. I don't miss it. Julia asked if I got rid of it, and I confirmed. She was fine with that. I still feel uneasy when I think about it. Part of me wonders if the painting is still out there growing darker. Sometimes I imagine someone else picking it up and taking it home, but I try not to dwell on it. I just focus on my routine, my job, and my life. That's all I can do for now. I first rented the basement parking spot about 3 months ago. I found it by chance while I was searching for a safe place to leave my car overnight. The building is a commercial tower in a busy part of town. There's no open lot nearby, and most garages in that area charge high monthly fees. This basement spot was a decent price, and it seemed fine during the initial walkthrough. The walls down there are unfinished cement, and the lighting is controlled by motion sensors. When I visited the space for the first time, the lights turned on without any delay. I could see everything clearly. Thick pillars, numbered spots, some storage cages along one wall. Nothing looked weird or suspicious at a glance. After I signed the lease for that parking spot, I started using it regularly. On my first actual night parking there, I felt a slight unease that I couldn't explain. The garage door closed behind me, automatically, and the sensors switched on the ceiling lights in segments. Each row of fluorescent bulbs flickered on, and I saw my shadow grow against the concrete wall. It was tall and stretched out, making me feel small. I noticed the columns cast strange overlapping shapes, but tried not to dwell on it. I simply parked my car, got out, and walked to the elevator. The next morning, everything felt normal. I picked up my car and no one else was around, which I expected because it was early. But the second night, I saw something move in the corner of my vision. It happened right after I killed the engine. The overhead lights were on, but they seemed a bit slow that evening. As I grabbed my backpack from the passenger seat, I saw a quick flicker of movement between two pillars. I turned my head right away, but nothing was there. I stepped out, shut the door, and listened. The basement was silent except for my footsteps echoing slightly. I scanned the area and saw only empty cars parked in their spots. I shrugged it off, telling myself I was just tired. I took the elevator up and didn't think about it again until I drove out the next day. By the time I hit the third night, I was feeling cautious. I tried to look around more carefully when I parked. The spot is close to the far wall, next to a big pillar that partially obscures the walkway. I turned off the ignition, opened the driver's door, and stepped out, paying attention to the corners. Again, I caught a glimpse of movement. It was a vague outline. It looked like part of a person's silhouette, but distorted. It vanished behind a pillar. My heart thumped and I could feel sweat on my forehead. I walked over to where I thought I saw it, but there was nothing. No footprints, no sound, no sign of anyone. I felt foolish. I even chuckled a bit, alone in that wide cement hallway. Despite those weird moments, I kept using the spot. The rent was good, and the location was convenient for my job. But every time I pulled in at night, the same series of events repeated itself. The motion sensor turned the lights on, my shadow stretched on the wall, and for a split second I saw movement in the edges of my vision. I started to feel a knot in my stomach each time I drove down the ramp. My hands would feel damp on the steering wheel. My shoulders would tense up, and I'd check my rearview mirror before I even parked. I told myself it was just my imagination. The place was quiet and dim, and it was easy for my brain to play tricks. One evening, I decided to look around more thoroughly. I arrived a bit later than usual, around 10 p.m. The garage was almost empty. I parked my car and left the engine running. I walked around to the trunk, keeping my eyes open for any sign of movement. The lights buzzed overhead, and I heard them flicker when I moved. My footsteps sounded louder than normal. I looked between pillars, checked under a few parked cars, and stood still for about a minute to listen. Nothing happened. No flickers, no rustling, no voices, nothing. I let out a long exhale, told myself I was being paranoid, and went back to grab my bag from the trunk. As soon as I bent down, a shadow slid across the far wall. I stood up so fast that I bumped my head on the open trunk lid. I slammed it shut, hissed through my teeth from the pain, and spun around. Again, there was no one. I was breathing heavily, and my pulse was pounding in my ears. I hurried to the elevator and left. After that, I knew I had to do something to confirm I wasn't losing my mind. So on a Friday night, I parked my car as usual. I set my phone to record video and propped it up on the driver's seat, facing the inside of the garage through the windshield. I made sure it had a clear view of the pillars ahead. Then I got out, opened the trunk, and pretended to sort through some bags. I spent a couple of minutes there, fiddling with random stuff, glancing around occasionally but trying not to look too obvious. I wanted to see if my phone would pick up anything unusual. When I got home, I locked my door, sat on the couch, and watched the footage. For about 45 seconds, nothing happened. I saw the lights, I saw the pillars, and I saw my own figure standing by the trunk.
Then, around the 1-minute mark, 2 dark shapes shot across the frame. They moved too fast for me to see details, but they weren't shaped like regular people. The outlines were warped. Their edges looked blurry. My stomach clenched as I paused and rewound. They came from the left side of the screen and crossed in front of a parked car before slipping out of view. There was no sound on the recording besides a faint hum. I played it again and again, but couldn't make sense of it. I spent most of that weekend replaying the video. I didn't show it to anyone. I wasn't sure how they'd react. I just felt uneasy, like I had confirmed something I wasn't ready to accept. I considered giving up that spot, but it's hard to find another garage with a reasonable price, and I really needed a stable place to keep my car. I tried to brush it off. I told myself maybe it was a glitch on my phone or maybe some reflection caused by the sensors, but deep down, I knew that wasn't right. I could see the distinct shapes moving at different times, even adjusting slightly as they moved past the pillars. On Monday, I returned to park there. I felt my chest tighten when I turned off the ramp into the basement. The sensor lights came on and I could hear the mechanical click of the overhead tubes. My own shadow appeared on the concrete wall. It was long and dark, just like always. I climbed out of the car and kept my eyes fixed on the area around the pillars. My breathing was shallow. I tried to steady myself. I told myself I only needed to lock the car and get to the elevator. That was it. Just a simple walk. But as soon as I closed the driver's door, I heard a faint scraping noise. It was coming from behind the far pillar. It sounded like something sliding across the floor. I paused and held my breath. I moved slowly around the car to get a better angle. My heart was pounding in my throat. I glanced toward the pillar, but I didn't see anything. The scraping noise stopped. Then the lights overhead clicked off. I guess the sensor didn't detect me. Or maybe it malfunctioned. Suddenly, it was almost pitch black. My pulse spiked. I waved my arms, hoping the sensors would switch on again. After a few seconds, they lit up. In that brief darkness, I felt a chill on my skin. I grabbed my backpack and went straight to the elevator. I avoided looking at the walls. As I pressed the button, I felt a prickle on the back of my neck, like someone was staring at me. I stepped into the elevator as soon as the doors opened and let out a long breath once I was moving up. That night, I thought about how to handle the situation. I decided I would try to find an alternative parking spot the next day. But the next day I called around, and every place either had a long waiting list or an insanely high fee. I didn't have many options. My office is close by, and the convenience saves me a lot of time every morning. So I kept the spot. Over the next week, I noticed the shadows more frequently. One night, I arrived about an hour earlier than usual. I expected that maybe other people would be in the garage. But when I got there, it was still mostly empty. I parked and quickly scanned the perimeter. I saw the same pillars, the same dull cement walls, and the same flickering fluorescent tubes. Nothing moved. I stepped out, locked the car, and waited. I heard my own breathing. I listened for footsteps. I heard a slight echo of my shoes on the concrete when I shifted my weight, but nothing else. Then, right before I started walking to the elevator, I felt a slight rush of cool air pass by me. I froze. I didn't see anything, but the air felt like it brushed against my jacket. My mouth went dry. I spun around, looking for any sign of movement. The lights flickered once. I heard the buzz in the ceiling. I saw my shadow wobble on the ground. Then everything stayed still. I forced myself to walk to the elevator, but I felt my legs tense and I was ready to sprint if something appeared. I tried talking to the building's manager about the lighting system. I asked if they'd had any complaints about flickering or sensor failures. The manager shrugged. He said everything was normal. He mentioned that he sometimes gets feedback from tenants about the basement being too dark. But that's just how it is. I didn't tell him about the shapes or the video. I felt it would sound too strange. I simply nodded and left. From that point on, parking became a tense ritual. I drive in, slow down as I approached my space, and watch the walls. The sensor lights would come on, and I'd see my own shape flicker across the concrete. I'd step out of the car, feel my pulse in my ears, and look around. Some nights, nothing happened. Other nights, I'd see a glimpse of something sliding along the back wall. It never stayed long enough for me to focus on it. It was always a quick darting motion. It was never a fully defined human figure. Instead, it seemed like a blurry mass, moving in unnatural ways. Sometimes it swayed from side to side. Sometimes it crept along the base of a pillar.
No one else ever seemed to be down there with me. I never heard voices or normal footsteps, just the faint hum of the lights and the faint echo of my own steps. At one point, I considered taking a flashlight with me to shine into the darker corners, but I was worried that might make me even more jumpy. I worried I'd see something I really didn't want to see. My nerves were already shot. My sleep was restless. I had dreams of large black shapes drifting around my car. I'd wake up in a sweat, dreading the next time I had to park. Despite all this, I kept going. I needed the spot. I told myself I'd move as soon as I found another place, but weeks went by and no better option showed up. Every night as I passed the ramp down, I felt my stomach clench. I'd reach for the door lock as soon as I pulled in. I noticed I developed a habit of checking my mirrors constantly. When I turned off the ignition, I'd take a deep breath and brace myself before stepping out. A few nights ago, I decided to record again. I set my phone on the dash this time, aimed at the pillars. I locked the doors but stayed in the car. I wanted to see if the shapes would appear if I remained still inside. I sat there quietly for about 4 minutes. The lights stayed on. I didn't see anything except my own reflection in the rear-view mirror. Then the lights went off. My phone kept recording in darkness. I stayed put, breathing slowly, hearing nothing but the dull whir of the building's ventilation. After a few seconds, the lights popped back on. Right then, I saw a quick streak of motion near the far column. It was in my peripheral vision again, but it was definitely there. I felt sweat break out on my forehead. I kept my eyes on that spot, but I didn't see any further movement. I turned off the recording and bolted for the elevator. When I checked the video later, I could make out a faint distortion near the pillar, but it was subtle and lasted less than half a second. So now I'm stuck with this situation. I park in that basement almost every night and keep seeing these shifting, deformed shadows. They don't make any noise besides those occasional scraping sounds, and they disappear whenever I try to investigate. I have no idea what they are. They're not people, and they're not simple illusions. They've recorded them. They're real, but I can't explain them. I feel a chill every time I walk to the elevator, and my shoulders stay tense until I'm upstairs. I haven't found a better place to park yet. I'm still searching. For now, I keep my phone in hand when I get out of the car, just in case. I don't wander around down there anymore. I move quickly. I stare at the pillars and watch for movement. Some nights I see nothing. Other nights I see those warped outlines gliding across the walls. Either way, it's always uncomfortable. I feel like the cement walls are holding on to something that doesn't belong there. Every time I leave, I feel drained. But until I find another spot, I don't have much choice. That's how things stand. I park, and I see those shadows. Then I rush out. That's my life right now. I just hope I can get out of that place soon. I felt a chill the moment I walked into that room. It wasn't dramatic at first. It was just this quick burst of cold air near the door that connected my unit to the next one. I stood there with my suitcase in one hand, my keycard in the other, and I felt a tight knot form in my stomach. Something about that door bothered me from the start. It looked ordinary, like any door you'd find in a hotel with adjoining rooms, but the knob felt strange when I tested it. It was locked, just as the front desk said it would be, yet my hand felt a slight vibration, like there was a breeze pushing against the door from the other side. I'm a sales rep, and I travel to different cities every month. I've stayed in all sorts of places, motels, fancy hotels, roadside inns. This time, the company booked me into an apart hotel that had a small kitchen, a living area, a separate bedroom. The front desk said the building wasn't very busy that week. I liked that idea because I figured it would be quiet. I checked in late in the afternoon, lugging my bags up to the elevator while flipping through emails on my phone. The hallways were wide and well lit, and the carpet looked new. When I reached my door, I noticed there was another door nearby. It belonged to the adjacent unit. I didn't see any light coming from underneath it. I assumed it was empty. Once inside my place, I tested the connecting door. It was locked, like I said, and there was no sign that it could be opened from my side. There was a small deadbolt above the handle, and that was locked too. I didn't think much of it at first. These places often have connecting doors for families or friends who rent both rooms. I unpacked a few clothes, stuck them in the closet, and then I went out to grab dinner. I came back around an hour. The room felt a bit cold when I walked in, but I figured the air conditioning was just set too low. I adjusted the thermostat and took a shower. Afterward, I sat on the couch to catch up on a video call with a coworker. While I was on that call, I caught myself glancing at that door a few times. I saw the handle reflected in the TV screen. I tried to push the thought out of my head, but it kept nagging me. Nothing was happening, but I had this urge to watch it. Eventually, I brushed my teeth and climbed into bed. The sheets were clean, and the pillow was firm. The place was pretty nice. I read some emails on my phone for about 10 minutes. Then I started to doze off. At some point, maybe after 30 minutes of lying there, I felt that cold air again. It rushed across the room, and I heard a faint creak. It sounded like the door hinges were moving, but I couldn't be sure. I sat up and saw that the door was still shut, but there was a draft, and it was stronger than anything the thermostat should have been producing. It felt like it was coming from the small gap under the door. I got up, walked over, and put my hand against the wood. It felt colder than the rest of the wall. I tried to listen for something, pressing my ear lightly. That's when I heard it, a muffled breath, except it also sounded like wind through a narrow space. It was constant and low, pausing every few seconds before coming back. My pulse picked up. I tried to reason that maybe there was an air duct on the other side, or that the adjoining room had its own cooling system turned down to a low temperature. I didn't have any other explanation, but it felt too strange for a normal air conditioning unit. I've heard AC units before. They hum or whir, but they don't sound like breathing. I considered going down to the front desk right then, but I was tired, and I convinced myself that I was making a big deal out of nothing. I went back to bed and pulled the blankets around my shoulders. The cold air made my skin prickle. After a few minutes, I slipped into a restless sleep. I woke up the next morning, got dressed, and went to my work meetings for the day. I tried not to dwell on that weird sensation, but it stayed in the back of my mind. When I got back around 5 in the evening, I passed by the front desk. I decided to ask if they had anyone staying in the next room. The woman at the desk checked her computer and said no. That unit was empty. She even said it had been blocked off for maintenance work. I asked if maintenance might be in there at night. She said nobody had reported any overnight work. Then she asked me if I wanted to switch rooms. I almost said yes, but I shrugged it off. I told her it was fine, that I was just curious. I didn't want to appear paranoid. I didn't like the idea of moving all my stuff. That evening, I grabbed dinner at a nearby burger place and took it back to the room. I ate while watching some random TV show. A few times I leaned my head over the side of the couch to look at that door. It was quiet. The air didn't feel cold. I thought maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. After I finished eating, I tossed the takeout bag in the trash and decided to do some work emails at the small dining table. I had my laptop open and I typed up a report. About an hour passed without any strange noises. I felt relieved. Around 9, I switched off most of the lights and got ready for bed. I had an early start the next morning. I went to the bathroom, brushed my teeth, and turned off the living area lights. The only light left was the small lamp on the nightstand. The bed looked inviting, and I sat there for a minute, scrolling through social media on my phone. Then I heard a click from the other side of that connecting door. It was a soft, deliberate click. That made me freeze. I stared at the door, and I noticed a faint glow seeping through the thin gap at the bottom. It wasn't bright. It was almost like someone had turned on a flashlight inside that empty unit. I set my phone aside and walked over, trying to be silent. My heart was pounding, and my mouth felt dry. I pressed my ear against the door and heard that breathing sound again, but this time it was broken up by a slight rattle, like someone was turning the handle. I could see the knob jiggling a bit. It turned a fraction of an inch, then stopped. My chest felt tight. I stood there, not sure what to do. Then the knob turned a little more, like someone testing if the door was locked. After a few seconds, it went back to its original position. The faint glow under the door disappeared, and the breathing sound got quieter. I just stood there, feeling my legs shake. I yanked the deadbolt to make sure it was locked on my side. It was, but I didn't feel safe. I grabbed a wooden chair from the dining table and wedged it under the knob. It was a simple wedge, nothing fancy, but I felt a tiny bit better having some barrier. I knew that if someone was determined to get in, a single chair might not be enough. Still, it gave me a little comfort. I considered calling the front desk, but I hesitated. I didn't want them thinking I was losing my mind. I tried to go to sleep with the lamp on. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was in there, standing near the other side of that door, maybe even listening to me. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the knob turning again. I pictured the door opening just enough to let a rush of cold air flood the room. I pictured seeing a figure in the darkness. My breathing was shallow and my chest felt heavy. I was on high alert, like I was waiting for something else to happen, but nothing did, at least for a while. Eventually I drifted off. I must have slept for a few hours, but it was a restless sleep. I kept hearing that weird breathing in my dreams. Around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly. The room felt cold again. My arms were covered in goosebumps. The small gap at the bottom of the door looked darker than before, like there was some shadow blocking the light from the hall. I couldn't see anything moving though. My eyes felt gritty, and my head was pounding. I lay there for a few minutes, listening, but there was no sound except the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchenette. I thought about packing my stuff and leaving right then, but I had nowhere to go in the middle of the night, and I doubted I'd find a better place at that hour without paying a fortune. So I stayed. I stayed awake until around 4. My body felt tense, and every small sound in the room made me jump. I kept glancing at the door. I wished I could block the entire frame with furniture, but the only heavy pieces in the room were the bed and a sofa, and neither would budge enough to wedge against the door. At some point I passed out from exhaustion. When my phone alarm rang at 6 a.m., I felt stiff and groggy. My mind was in a fog. I dragged myself up, showered, and forced down a granola bar for breakfast. Before leaving for my morning meetings, I checked the door again. The chair was still in place. The deadbolt was still locked, but there was a chill in the air that made my skin crawl. On my way out, I told the front desk guy that something felt off about the connecting door. He asked if I wanted them to send someone to check it out. I said yes. He made a note on a clipboard. I asked again if that adjacent room was empty, and he said yes. It was definitely empty. I spent the day feeling anxious. My meetings blurred together, or kept thinking about what I'd seen or thought I'd seen. I pictured that faint glow, the slow turn of the knob, and that breathing. Every time I remembered it, my neck got stiff, and I felt sweat forming on my palms. By the end of the afternoon, I considered asking my boss to switch me to a different hotel, but I knew that would cause problems with the travel budget, so I told myself I'd just get through one more night. I planned to push a piece of furniture in front of the door again and sleep with the lights on if necessary. When I got back, I asked the front desk if someone had checked the adjoining room. They said housekeeping took a look. Everything was locked, and there were no signs of anyone inside. They also said the room was a bit cold because the air conditioning had been left on a low setting. That was all they found. They turned off the AC and locked the door behind them. I tried to stay calm, my pulse was racing. If housekeeping had just been in there, that might explain the glow I saw, if it had been the night before, but the reception assured me no one was in there during the night. That last evening I got back to my room, and nothing seemed different. The door looked the same. The chair was where I left it. I heated up a meal in the microwave but barely touched it. I felt sick to my stomach from the tension. I kept thinking about how the knob had turned. I considered shoving the couch in front of the door, but it was too wide to fit neatly. Instead, I stuck with the chair method. I also took my luggage and placed it next to the chair, just to create more obstacles. After that, I sat on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, and stared at the door for over an hour. I felt my eyes burn from not blinking enough. That night, I barely slept, dozing off for 10-minute intervals only to wake with a jolt. Every time I checked the door, the chair was still there, and the deadbolt looked secure. I didn't see any light, but I didn't hear breathing either. I just felt cold. It was a penetrating cold that made me shiver under the blankets. It felt like that door was the source. I kept my phone in my hand, ready to dial the front desk if something happened. Nothing did though. It stayed quiet until morning. The next day, I got up early and packed. I didn't care if I had to leave a day ahead of schedule. I was done with that place. I took my suitcase, made sure I didn't leave anything behind, and shut the door behind me. My throat felt tight, and my hands were shaking as I locked the room one last time. I caught a cab to the airport and managed to change my flight. I didn't want to spend another night in that apart hotel. I didn't want to walk by that door again or feel that cold air. On the drive, I kept looking over my shoulder as if expecting something to follow me. I felt relief, only after I was seated on the plane. I don't know if there was a logical explanation for everything I experienced. Maybe I was overworked, or maybe the AC in that other room was malfunctioning. but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there. Something that didn't belong in an empty unit. I haven't stayed in another apart hotel since. Every time I book a trip now, I make sure I get a room with no connecting door. I still remember that cold draft, the slow turn of the knob, and a low noise that sounded like breathing. I don't want to be that close to whatever was behind that door again. I still remember the first time I heard that phone ring. It was about 3 weeks ago, late in the afternoon, right after I moved into this old office space. The phone was sitting on a wooden desk in the corner, disconnected from any line. I had even checked the back of the phone. The cable was hanging loose and there was no jack connected to it. The telephone company said there was no service activated here. They had no record of any recent installation or any old line that was still active. Yet I heard a single ring, short, sharp, and impossible to ignore. I froze for a second, my heart started pounding fast, and I walked over to the phone. I lifted the receiver and pressed it against my ear. There was only static, no voice, no background noise, just a dull hiss like distant wind. I felt uneasy, but I told myself it might be some electrical glitch in the building. I put the receiver down and tried to focus on unpacking my files and boxes. The building itself is pretty old. It's got creaky floors, old radiators, and these thick wooden doors that make a heavy thud every time you close them. My office is on the second floor at the end of a long, narrow hallway. The walls have an outdated beige paint. The ceiling tiles are stained in places. There's a faint smell of dust and stale air, but I've seen worse. I figured I could fix the place up a bit and make it my own, but that phone kept catching my eye. It's an old rotary phone, black with a chipped surface, and the dial is stiff. The cable is worn out, the plastic looks brittle, and the metal connectors at the end are slightly rusted. The day after I heard the first ring, I tried to ignore the phone. I had a lot of work to do, and I didn't want to get stuck thinking about weird noises. I had set up my laptop on a makeshift desk near the window. I arranged my papers and files around me, and spent most of the day calling clients on my cell phone, sending emails, and organizing my schedule. At some point, I walked out to grab some coffee from a small place down the street. When I came back, everything was quiet. I didn't hear anything unusual. I was glad. I started thinking maybe I had imagined a ring or misheard something else in the building. Late that afternoon, I was closing my laptop when I heard it again. This time, it was a such ring, less than a second, and it stopped immediately. I felt a jolt in my chest, like a quick spasm. I stood up, walked over to the phone, and stared at it. The phone was still on the desk, the receiver was in place, and the cable was still dangling off the side, not plugged into anything. I reached out and picked up the receiver again. The static was still there, but now it was more like a faint crackle. I listened for a few moments, but nothing else came through. I put it down and decided to double-check the wiring in the office. Over the next few days, I poked around the space, looking for hidden jacks or any kind of extension that might be feeding power to the phone. The walls had old panels and some exposed wiring near the baseboards, but everything looked either cut or abandoned. I pulled out a flashlight and shone it into some of the gaps. I couldn't see any cables that were live. I even unscrewed one of the outlet covers to see if there was a phone line jammed in there. But no, everything was either capped off or disconnected. I started to feel frustrated, but I kept telling myself that there had to be a reasonable explanation. I also asked the landlord about the phone line. He shrugged and said he didn't know there was still a phone in the office. According to him, the last tenant left a few months ago and never mentioned a phone. The landlord said he cancelled any phone service long before I moved in. I pressed him about the possibility of old lines still being active. He said it was impossible. The building's phone lines had been ripped out and updated with modern wiring a long time ago, and each tenant is supposed to arrange their own service. That phone was probably just left behind as junk, he said. I felt unsettled. That static wasn't in my head, and that ring was definitely not my imagination. I started to notice a pattern. Each time the phone rang, I was alone in the office, usually late in the day. The ring was always a single burst. Sometimes it was loud, sometimes softer, but it never repeated more than once. After each ring, I'd get that clench in my stomach. My hands would go cold, and my breathing would become shallow. I'd pick up the receiver, and the static would still be there, like a broken radio station. One evening, I decided to stay late. I had a few projects to finish, and I also wanted to see if the phone would ring again. The hallway lights were on a timer, so they flickered off around 7 p.m. leaving only emergency lights in the corridor. I didn't mind, I was focused on my screen, typing up some reports. At around 8 p.m. I heard the phone ring again. This time it was a bit louder than usual. I stood up so fast that my knee banged against the desk. My heart was hammering. I hurried to the phone, grabbed the receiver, and said hello. My voice was shaky. I felt my throat tighten. There was static, followed by a softer hissing sound, like a breeze passing through a narrow gap. I listened carefully. My chest felt tight, and I could feel my palms getting sweaty. Then I spoke again. Hello? Is anyone there? No answer. I waited a few more seconds, hearing only that faint hiss. I put the receiver down gently, but I couldn't relax. My skin was crawling. I wiped my hands on my pants and took a few deep breaths. I walked over to the window and looked outside. The street was dark, except for a few lights on the sidewalk. I tried to shake off the jitters, but I felt like something was off in that room. I didn't tell anyone about the phone at first. I didn't want people to think I was being paranoid or superstitious, but I started losing sleep. I'd lie in bed picturing that phone on the desk, waiting for it to ring again. My dreams were uneasy. I'd wake up in a sweat, half expecting to hear the ring echo in my bedroom. One morning I arrived at the office and checked the phone again. Same static. I wiggled the cable, tapped the receiver, and listened closely. No difference. I tried to ignore it and get back to work. A few days later, I got in touch with a local electrician. He came over to inspect the wiring in the office. He carried a small toolkit and a voltage tester. He checked the outlets and the phone jacks. He even opened the breaker box in the hallway. After about an hour, he shrugged and said everything looked normal. There was no sign of an active phone line in my space. He scratched his head and said, maybe it was some leftover electromagnetic interference from the building's old wiring, but he admitted that wouldn't usually cause an actual ring, especially not one strong enough to sound exactly like a phone call. I thanked him and walked him to the door. Before he left, he asked if the phone was antique or if I collected old telephones. I told him it was just here when I moved in. He suggested maybe removing the phone altogether. I told him I'd think about it. I felt silly. It was just a phone, and there had to be a reason for what was happening. Still, I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. Some part of me wanted to figure this out. Another part of me felt nervous about what I might discover. That same night I stayed late again. I was standing by the desk, finishing a phone call with a client on my cell. When the old phone rang, my client on the other end even heard it. He asked if I needed to get that. I froze for a second and said no. It's nothing important. But my body tensed up, and my heartbeat picked up speed. After the call ended, I stared at that old phone. The ring had already stopped. I picked up the receiver again. Static. My throat was dry. I whispered, "Is anyone there?" I felt foolish, but I was compelled to ask. Nothing. I put the receiver down, grabbed my jacket, and left the office. I couldn't focus on anything else. A week went by. The phone rang 3 more times, each ring separated by a few days, always in the late afternoon or early evening. I tried answering it every time, but I never heard a voice, just that quiet hiss or crackle. I noticed my hands shaking whenever I heard that sound. My neck would tense up, and I'd clench my teeth. Sometimes I even got a little lightheaded. It was the kind of tension that builds up in your body and doesn't leave until you step outside into fresh air. At this point, I started telling a close friend about it. He laughed at first, thinking I was messing with him, then suggested maybe it was a prank. He joked that I should set up a hidden camera, but I couldn't figure out how anyone would make the phone ring without an actual line. My friend said maybe I should just toss it in the trash, but I hesitated. I felt like I needed to keep it right where it was until I had some closure. A few days later, I tried something different. I put my phone's voice recorder near the old phone, hoping to catch the sound when it rang. I left it running while I worked. Hours passed, and nothing happened. I shut it off and decided to do the same thing the next day. Eventually, on a Wednesday afternoon around 6 p.m., I heard that single ring again. It made me jump in my seat. My arms and legs felt stiff. I picked up the receiver, said hello, and heard the same static. When I played back the recording, I realized it had captured the ring, but it didn't sound like a normal ring on playback. Instead, it was like a sharp crack, followed by silence. There was no sustained ringtone, just a snap. I could still hear my voice in the recording after that, asking if anyone was there. Then there was a faint hiss. That was it. It didn't give me any more information. I started to feel uneasy every time I walked into the office. My routine changed. I found myself checking the phone first thing in the morning, looking for any sign that it had rung overnight. There was never any message or note, of course. It's just a dead phone. I tried moving it to a corner by the window, but it still rang from time to time. I moved it into the small storage closet and left it on a shelf. The next day, I heard the ring again, muffled by the closet door. My chest constricted. I dashed to the closet, swung the door open, and answered. Same static.
One Friday after I wrapped up my work, I considered taking the phone out of the office.
I picked it up and felt its weight in my hand. It was heavier than modern phones, with sturdy plastic and metal parts. I carried it to the front door, then paused. I felt like my pulse was throbbing in my ears. My stomach felt tight. For some reason, I couldn't leave with it. My mind raced with thoughts about how weird this whole situation was. I went back and placed the phone on the desk again. Maybe I was hoping for an answer. Later that evening, I was packing up, ready to head home, when the phone rang again. My muscles tensed so hard my shoulders hurt. I moved slowly this time, picking up the receiver gently. Static. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, listening to the crackle. Then I spoke in a calm voice. Who is this? I waited. The hiss didn't change. It was just a faint rush of white noise. I felt a bead of sweat roll down the side of my face. My thoughts were racing, but they were all jumbled. I asked again, who is this? No response. I stayed on the line for about 30 seconds. Then I put the receiver down. I felt drained, as if I had run a mile. I sat there, staring at the phone, noticing my breaths coming in quick bursts. I left the office and locked up. On my way out of the building, I passed a few other empty rooms. No one else was around. The hallway was quiet except for the hum of the overhead lights. When I reached the exit, I glanced back. I had this nagging feeling that the phone might ring again as soon as I was gone, but I couldn't bring myself to go back inside to check. I haven't moved out yet. I still use that office during the day. The phone keeps ringing, maybe once or twice a week. I answer it every time. It's always the same static. I have no logical explanation. I've stopped calling electricians and phone companies. They all say the same thing. The phone shouldn't be able to ring, but it does. And every time it rings, my heart pounds so loud it hurts my ears. I can't ignore it, even though it scares me. It's become part of my routine now. Each day, I open the door, flip on the lights, and glance over at the old phone. I can throw it out. Part of me expects, or dreads, that single ring. Part of me stands there, waiting for it to happen again. I wish I had a conclusion, but I don't. All I have is that phone, disconnected and silent most of the time. Then, without warning, it rings once, cutting through the silence of the room. I pick it up, hear static, and hang up. That's all that happens.
I keep waiting, wondering if someday I'll hear a voice on the other end. Or maybe I'll figure out that it's just a freak electrical surge.
But until then, I'm stuck in this loop. I hear the ring, I pick up, and I hang up. No children involved, no tragedies. Just an unsettling phone that won't stop ringing even though it's disconnected. And for now, that's my story.